30 untouched cupcakes sat melting on my kitchen counter, while my 7-year-old daughter stared at the front door, waiting for a family that was never going to show up. Hours later, my mother sent me a text demanding $2,500 for my spoiled teenage sister's party. I sent her $2 with a brief congratulations, and then I changed the locks on my house. When they tried to break in, I let them call the police on themselves. If you have ever been pushed too far by toxic relatives, stick around and hit subscribe because you will want to hear how this ended. My name is Joanna. I am 33 years old and I work as a forensic accountant in Chicago. I have spent my entire adult life building a stable and peaceful world for my daughter Lily. As a single mother, every choice I make revolves around giving her the childhood I never had. But some wounds are hard to protect her from, especially when they come from the people who are supposed to love us the most. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, and my living room was a sea of pastel pink and purple balloons. I had spent the entire night before decorating our home for Lily's 7th birthday party. I hung streamers across the ceiling, assembled a massive unicorn arch by the front door, and baked 30 vanilla cupcakes from scratch with homemade buttercream frosting. Lily had been talking about this day for weeks. She was wearing her favorite sparkly tulle dress, sitting on the bottom step of our staircase with her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes were glued to the front window, waiting for her grandparents to arrive. The party was supposed to start at 1 o'clock. By 2 o'clock, the ice in the punch bowl had completely melted, and the living room was suffocatingly silent. I had invited my parents, Linda and David, along with my 15-year-old sister, Haley. They had RSVP'd weeks ago, promising they would be there early to help me set up. But as the clock ticked past 2:30, the reality of their absence hung in the air like a heavy, dark cloud. I kept looking at my phone, willing it to ring. I checked to make sure I had cell service. I wondered if they had gotten caught in traffic or had a flat tire. I even considered calling the local hospitals. But deep down, I knew the truth. This was not an emergency. This was a choice. "Mom, where are Grandma and Grandpa Lily?" asked her small voice, echoing in the quiet house. She adjusted her sparkly headband, looking up at me with big, hopeful eyes. I knelt down in front of her, forcing a bright smile onto my face while my heart broke into a million pieces. "I am sure they are just running a little late." "Sweetie," I lied, smoothing out the tulle of her skirt. "Why do not we start the music and play some games while we wait?" Lily shook her head, returning her gaze to the window. "I want to wait for them. They promised they would bring me a special present." I stood up and walked into the kitchen, gripping the edge of the granite counter until my knuckles turned white. 30 perfectly frosted cupcakes sat on the island, mocking me. I had bent over backward to accommodate my parents' schedules, moving the party to a Saturday instead of Sunday, just so it would not interfere with my father's golf league. I had ordered the specific brand of sparkling water my mother preferred. I had done everything right, and they had completely ghosted us. Just as I was about to dial my mother's number again, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was not a text message or a missed call. It was a notification from Instagram. The alert flashed across my screen, telling me that my mother was broadcasting live. I unlocked my phone and tapped the notification, my stomach twisting into a tight knot. The video loaded instantly. The screen was filled with the opulent gold and crystal interior of the Pine Valley Country Club, the most exclusive venue in our city. The camera panned across a massive mahogany table covered in crystal platters of delicate pastries, champagne flutes, and towering slices of gourmet cake. "Look at this spread, everyone!" My mother's voice cooed from behind the camera, sounding absolutely delighted. "We are here doing the official cake tasting for Haley's Sweet 16, and it is just beyond gorgeous." The camera flipped around to show my mother Linda wearing a designer silk blouse, her hair perfectly styled. She smiled brightly at the camera before turning the lens toward my father David and my sister Haley. Haley was sitting at the head of the table, looking bored as she picked at a slice of red velvet cake with a silver fork. "Say hi to the camera, princess," my father urged, leaning in to kiss Haley on the cheek. "We are sparing no expense for our miracle baby, only the absolute best for her big day." Haley rolled her eyes, but offered a practiced smile for the live stream. This cake is okay, but I think I want the imported vanilla bean instead, she said casually, dismissing a slice of cake that probably cost more than my entire grocery budget for the week. Of course, darling, my mother chimed in. Whatever you want. We are paying $500 a plate for this tasting, so you just tell the chef exactly what your vision is. I stood in my kitchen watching the video in absolute horror. I looked from the screen to the cheap homemade cupcakes on my counter, and then toward the hallway, where my 7-year-old daughter was still waiting patiently for her grandparents. They were not stuck in traffic. They had not had an emergency. They were 10 miles away, drinking champagne and eating gourmet cake for a party that was still months away. They had chosen a catering appointment for a teenager over the actual birth date of their only granddaughter. The sheer cruelty of it literally took my breath away. My hands started to shake, not with sadness, but with a blinding white-hot rage. I closed the Instagram app and immediately dialed my mother's cell phone number. The phone rang 3 times before she finally picked up. "Hello," she answered, her voice clipped and hushed. "Where are you?" I asked, keeping my tone dangerously low so Lily would not hear me from the hallway. "Joanna." "I cannot talk right now," my mother whispered, sounding incredibly annoyed. "We are at the country club meeting with the executive chef. It is very high stakes and we need to concentrate." "You are at a cake tasting," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed fury. "Do you know what today is, Mom? Do you know where you are supposed to be right now?" There was a brief, irritated sigh on the other end of the line. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Joanna, do not start this right now. You promised Lily you would be here," I pressed, gripping the phone tighter. "She is sitting by the front door in her party dress waiting for you. You promised her a present. You promised you would be here early. You completely ghosted your granddaughter's birthday for a cake tasting." "Keep your voice down," my mother hissed, the mask of the loving grandmother completely falling away. "We are at a very exclusive club, and I will not have you causing a scene over the phone. Haley's milestone is a massive undertaking. Do you have any idea how much pressure we are under to make this perfect? We had to take this appointment today. You RSVP'd to your granddaughter's birthday weeks ago," I shot back. "Lily is only 7. My mother interrupted, her tone dripping with dismissive contempt. "She will not even remember this party by next week. Haley is turning 16. This is a major societal event for our family. Stop being so dramatic and selfish, Joanna. The world does not revolve around you and your kid. You need to learn how to be a supportive sister instead of throwing a tantrum every time Haley gets some well-deserved attention." Before I could say another word, the line went dead. She had hung up on me. I lowered the phone from my ear, staring blankly at the dark screen. The kitchen felt incredibly cold. I could hear the faint sound of the cartoon playing on the television in the living room, the one I had turned on to distract Lily. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself, trying to push the tears of frustration back down. I could not let Lily see me cry. I had to be strong for her. I walked out of the kitchen and back into the hallway. Lily looked up at me, her little face falling when she saw that my hands were empty and I was alone. "Are they coming?" she asked, her lower lip trembling slightly. I dropped to my knees and pulled her into a tight embrace, wrapping my arms around her small frame. "I am so sorry, my sweet girl," I whispered into her hair. "Grandma and Grandpa had an emergency at work, and they cannot make it today. But you know what? That means we get to eat all the cupcakes ourselves, and we are going to have the best movie marathon ever. Just you and me." Lily sniffled, burying her face in my shoulder. "Okay, Mommy." I spent the next hour packing up the party decorations, tearing down the unicorn arch, and putting the 30 untouched cupcakes into plastic containers. Every piece of tape I pulled off the wall, every balloon I popped felt like a physical manifestation of my breaking point. I had spent my entire life accepting this treatment from them, but watching them do it to my innocent child crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I was just putting the last container of cupcakes into the refrigerator when my phone chimed loudly from the kitchen island. I assumed it was my mother sending a half-hearted apology, or perhaps a fake excuse to cover her tracks. I walked over and picked up the device. It was a notification from our family group chat, but it was not an apology. It was a demand. My mother had sent a message to the group which included my father, my sister, and myself. I stared at the glowing screen, reading the words over and over again, unable to comprehend the sheer audacity of what she had typed. The floral arrangements for Haley's Sweet 16 are running completely over budget, she wrote. The designer wants a massive deposit by tomorrow to secure the imported orchids. Joanna, since you are her older sister, and you have a good job, you need to contribute to this family milestone. Send $2,500 to my account by tonight for the deposit. Do not make us ask twice. I stood frozen in the middle of my kitchen. They had ignored my daughter, abandoned her on her birthday, insulted me over the phone, and now, less than 2 hours later, they were demanding $2,500 to fund a lavish party for the golden child. The disrespect was not just blatant, it was a weapon they were actively wielding against me. They expected me to simply fall into line to open my wallet and fund the very event that they had prioritized over my child. I looked at the message, the cursor blinking steadily on my screen. A cold, calculating calm washed over me. I logged into my mobile banking app, selected my mother's account, and typed in a transfer amount. But I did not type $2,500. I transferred exactly $2. Then I returned to the family group chat and typed my reply. Congrats on the milestone. Buy her a candy bar. I hit send, locked my phone, and set it face down on the counter. The war had officially begun and I was ready for it. Exactly 5 minutes after I sent that $2 transfer, my phone vibrated against the granite countertop. The screen illuminated the dark kitchen, displaying my father's name. I did not pick up. I stood perfectly still, listening to the harsh buzzing sound as the phone danced across the stone surface. When it finally stopped, a notification appeared indicating I had a new voicemail. I took a deep breath, tapped the screen, and pressed the speaker icon. My father's voice filled the quiet kitchen, thick with rage and entitlement. Joanna, I do not know what kind of sick joke you think you are playing, but it is not funny. Your mother is in tears right now, and the event planner is waiting for the deposit. You are going to pay for this venue one way or another. You owe this family. Fix your attitude and send the rest of the money immediately. The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I deleted the message, dropped my phone back onto the counter, and grabbed a sponge to wipe down the already spotless island. I scrubbed the stone surface over and over again, pressing down until my shoulder ached, using the physical motion to anchor myself to reality. You owe this family. The words echoed in my head, bouncing off the walls of the home I had bought and paid for entirely by myself. My parents had a very distorted view of what I owed them. Hearing my father demand money triggered a suffocating wave of memories, pulling me back 15 years to a time when my entire future was stolen out from under me. Haley was not just my younger sister. She was their miracle baby born when I was 18 years old and preparing to leave for college. My parents had spent years trying to have another child, ignoring the fact that they already had one sitting right in front of them. When natural methods failed, they turned to expensive fertility treatments. They never told me how they were funding the endless rounds of IVF, the specialist appointments, and the hormone therapies. I assumed they were using their savings or taking out loans. It was not until the summer before my freshman year of college, when I tried to pay my first semester tuition, that I discovered the devastating truth. My college fund, an account my grandparents had started for me when I was a baby, and that I had contributed to with every part-time job I ever had, was completely empty. My parents had drained every single cent to pay for the medical procedures that resulted in Haley. When I confronted them, they did not apologize. They did not show an ounce of remorse. My mother simply patted her growing belly and told me that family requires sacrifice, and that as a healthy, capable adult, I should be thrilled to contribute to the creation of my new sibling. They told me I could just take out student loans and pay my own way. That betrayal fundamentally changed who I was. While my friends were joining sororities and going to campus parties, I was working grueling graveyard shifts at a logistics company, doing data entry until 4 in the morning. I would sleep for 2 hours, wake up and go to my accounting classes, trying desperately to stay awake through lectures on tax law and corporate audits. I lived on cheap ramen noodles and instant coffee, wearing the same 3 pairs of jeans for 4 years straight. I built my career as a forensic accountant brick by agonizing brick. I learned how to track hidden assets, how to uncover financial fraud, and how to spot a liar from a mile away. I did it all without a single dollar or a word of encouragement from my parents. While I was struggling to survive, they were treating Haley like royalty. They bought her designer clothes, threw her lavish parties, and catered to her every whim. She was their golden child, the physical manifestation of their expensive miracle, and I was nothing more than the scapegoat they had stepped on to get her. My phone buzzed again, pulling me violently back to the present. Then it buzzed again, and again. The notifications began pouring in, overlapping each other in a relentless rapid-fire assault. The family group chat was officially melting down. I picked up the phone and opened the messaging app. My father had sent a block of text so long it filled the entire screen. He called me a spiteful, ungrateful failure. He accused me of deliberately trying to sabotage my sister's happiness because I was incapable of finding my own. Then he crossed the one line he knew would cut the deepest. He brought up my failed marriage. "You are projecting the bitterness of your divorce onto your innocent teenage sister," he wrote. "Just because your husband could not stand to stay married to you does not mean you get to ruin Haley's special day. You have always been jealous of the attention she receives. You need professional help, Joanna. You are a miserable, isolated woman, and you are going to end up completely alone." I stared at the words, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. My ex-husband had walked out on Lily and me when she was just a baby, leaving us for a woman 10 years younger and moving across the country. The divorce had broken me for a long time, but I had pulled myself together for my daughter. I had fought tooth and nail to give Lily a peaceful, stable life, far away from the kind of chaos my parents thrived on. For my father to weaponize my divorce, to use my deepest vulnerability as a club to beat me into submission over a party deposit, was a new low, even for him. A new message popped up, this one an audio file from Haley. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before pressing play. Haley's voice filled the kitchen, shrill and hysterical. "Joanna, you are literally ruining my life!" She sobbed, her voice cracking with forced emotion. "Do you know how humiliating it is to sit here with the event planner and look like we cannot afford the floral arch I want? My aesthetic for the party is enchanted forest, and I need those imported orchids. You are trying to ruin my aesthetic because you are cheap and selfish. All my friends are going to judge me if the venue looks tacky. I hate you so much right now." The audio message ended, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. I stood there marveling at the absolute delusion of it all. My 15-year-old sister was crying over imported orchids for an enchanted forest aesthetic while completely ignoring the fact that she and my parents had just ghosted her 7-year-old niece's birthday party. The disconnect from reality was staggering. They honestly believed that their desires were the only things that mattered in the world, and that I existed solely to facilitate their extravagant lifestyle. More messages followed in quick succession. My mother sent a guilt-tripping paragraph about how she had sacrificed her youth to raise me and how this was my opportunity to repay my debt to the family. She claimed she was having heart palpitations from the stress I was causing her and threatened to cut me out of the family completely if I did not transfer the $2,500 by midnight. I did not reply. I did not justify my actions. I did not explain how hard I worked for my money or remind them that they had just broken my daughter's heart a few hours ago. Any response I gave would only provide them with more ammunition. It would only fuel the drama they were so desperately trying to ignite. They wanted a fight. They wanted me to engage so they could manipulate the argument and twist my words until I surrendered out of pure exhaustion. Instead, I opened the settings menu on my phone and muted the family group chat. I turned off the notifications completely, ensuring that their toxic demands and cruel insults would no longer interrupt my evening. I set the phone down, feeling a profound sense of finality settling over me. I was done explaining myself. I was done trying to earn the love of people who viewed me as nothing more than an ATM. I walked out of the kitchen and tiptoed down the hallway toward the living room. Lily was asleep on the sofa, a colorful fleece blanket pulled up to her chin. The movie we had been watching was playing softly on the television, casting a gentle blue light across her peaceful face. She looked so small and innocent, completely unaware of the vicious storm raging on my phone just a few rooms away. I sat down gently on the edge of the coffee table, watching her chest rise and fall with each steady breath. I reached out and carefully brushed a stray lock of hair away from her forehead. She stirred slightly, but did not wake. In that quiet moment, I made a silent, unbreakable vow to my daughter. I would never let them make her feel the way they had made me feel my entire life. I would never allow her to believe that her worth was tied to how much money she could provide or how much abuse she could tolerate. She would never be their scapegoat. I would be the shield that protected her from their selfishness, even if it meant tearing down the only family I had ever known. I stood up and quietly walked back down the hallway, checking the deadbolt on the front door to make sure it was secure. My parents still had a spare emergency key to my house, a key I had given them 5 years ago when I first moved in. At the time, I had naively believed that we could build a normal, healthy relationship. I thought that maybe becoming a homeowner and a mother would finally earn me their respect. I had been foolish. As I checked the lock, a strange, unsettling feeling crept up the back of my neck. My parents were furious and desperate. They needed money for a luxury party they clearly could not afford on their own, and they felt entirely entitled to my resources. They were not the kind of people who simply accepted no for an answer and walked away. They would find a way to escalate this. The group chat explosion was only the beginning. The real retaliation was yet to come, and I needed to be ready for it. I turned off the hallway light and headed upstairs, leaving the silent house wrapped in darkness, completely unaware of the sinister plan my parents were already putting into motion. The retaliation for my $2 transfer began exactly at 6 in the morning. I was sitting at my kitchen island drinking my first cup of black coffee when my phone lit up with a barrage of notifications. I had muted the group chat the night before, but my father, David, had bypassed the chat entirely to send a direct message. It was a wall of text so long I had to scroll twice to read it all. He called me a spiteful, ungrateful failure. He said I was an embarrassment to the family name, and that my refusal to fund my sister's party was a pathetic cry for attention. But the part that made my jaw clench was his final paragraph. He told me that I was projecting the bitterness of my failed marriage onto my innocent teenage sister. He claimed that just because I could not keep a man and was raising a child in a broken home, I had no right to ruin Haley's happiness. He said my jealousy over her bright future was sick, and that I was punishing her because my own life had amounted to a lonely, miserable existence. I read the words twice, feeling the familiar sting of his emotional manipulation. When my ex-husband left me for a younger woman, my father did not offer a shoulder to cry on. He told me I should have tried harder to maintain my appearance and keep my husband satisfied. He had always viewed me as a disappointment, and my divorce was just another piece of evidence to support his theory. I did not reply to his text. Engaging with David only fueled his rage. A few minutes later, a voice memo arrived from Haley. I pressed play and listened to the sound of my 15-year-old sister sobbing hysterically. Her tears were completely performative. "Joanna, you are literally ruining my aesthetic," she cried, her voice cracking artificially. "All my friends are getting massive floral arches for their parties, and you are making me look poor. You live in that huge, renovated house, and you make so much money, but you will not even help your own sister. You are a terrible person, and you are ruining my entire life." I deleted the audio file without a second thought. I silenced my phone entirely and went upstairs to wake Lily for school, refusing to engage or offer a single word of apology. I pushed the family drama out of my mind and focused entirely on my work and my daughter. 3 days passed in blissful silence. I assumed my parents were busy scrambling to find another way to pay for their overpriced orchids. On Thursday afternoon, I came home early from the accounting firm to water the garden. I had spent the last 2 years completely renovating my suburban home, transforming it from a neglected foreclosure into a pristine, modern sanctuary. The front yard featured perfectly manicured bushes and a sprawling green lawn that I tended to meticulously. As I was coiling the garden hose, my next-door neighbor Martha walked over to the property line. Martha was a retired school teacher who kept a close eye on the neighborhood. She leaned against the wooden fence, with a curious expression on her face. "Joanna, I did not want to alarm you," she began, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But I saw your parents here on Tuesday afternoon while you were at the office." I froze, the garden hose slipping slightly in my grip. My parents had not visited my house in months. They considered my neighborhood too far out of the way and not prestigious enough for their tastes. Why would they be here while I was at work? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Martha shook her head. They were walking all around the property. They spent nearly an hour taking photos of the exterior of your house and measuring the driveway. They even brought a guest with them, a very sharply dressed woman carrying a clipboard. I thought maybe you were planning to sell the place, but they were pointing at the backyard and talking about party layouts. I thanked Martha for the information, forced a polite smile, and walked calmly into my house. The moment the front door locked behind me, my professional instincts took over completely. As a forensic accountant, I deal in facts, timelines, and undeniable proof. I marched straight to my home office and booted up my desktop computer. I pulled up the comprehensive security system I had installed during the renovation. I clicked on the Tuesday afternoon logs and fast-forwarded to 1 o'clock. The high-definition color footage loaded onto my monitor, revealing a scene that made my blood run absolutely cold. A sleek black SUV pulled into my driveway. My mother, Linda, and my father, David, stepped out. They were accompanied by a woman in a tailored blazer who was indeed holding a silver clipboard. I recognized the woman immediately from local magazine features. She was the owner of the city's most expensive luxury event planning agency. I watched in total disbelief as my parents led the event planner around the side of my house and directly through the gate into my meticulously landscaped backyard. I unmuted the audio feed, turning the volume up as high as it would go. The microphone on my back patio camera captured their voices with chilling clarity. Linda was waving her arms expansively, acting as if she owned the entire property. "This is the primary entertaining space," Linda announced, her voice dripping with artificial confidence. "The lawn is perfectly flat, which is exactly what we need." The event planner nodded, taking notes on her clipboard. "It is a beautiful property," she said. "Where exactly did you envision the main structures?" Linda walked right up to my prized hydrangea bushes. "The DJ booth and the main sound system will go right here against the flowers," she instructed. "We will lay the custom dance floor directly over the stone patio. And for the catering, we can set up the main prep tents along the back fence line. I want hanging string lights draped from the oak trees all the way across to the roof of the house." I stared at the screen, visualizing the absolute destruction a massive party would cause to my property. The heavy equipment would crush the grass, the catering tents would tear up the garden beds, and the sheer volume of people would decimate the peaceful sanctuary I had built for my daughter. The event planner looked up at the back of the house, studying the large glass doors that led into my kitchen. "We will need access to the main kitchen and the ground floor bathrooms for a guest list of 150 teenagers," she noted, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "Will the homeowner be comfortable with that level of foot traffic inside?" Linda laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "Oh, do not worry about my daughter," she said breezily, smoothing her designer jacket. "It is a family home, and she is more than happy to let us use it. She will not even be here to get in the way." I paused the security footage, freezing the image of my mother standing on my patio and planning a massive unauthorized commercial event on my property. My mind raced, trying to connect the pieces of this insane puzzle. Why would they hijack my house? I thought about the rumors Aunt Barbara had accidentally confirmed months ago about my parents struggling to pay their country club dues. Their own house was falling into disrepair due to decades of financial irresponsibility. They could not afford to host a party of this magnitude at a legitimate venue, and they were too embarrassed to host it at their own crumbling property, so they had decided to simply steal mine. But Linda's final comment echoed in my ears. "She will not even be here to get in the way." I opened my digital calendar and looked at the dates for the upcoming month. My eyes landed on the third weekend of the month, the exact weekend Haley was turning 16. A bold red block spanned 3 days on my schedule. I was booked for a mandatory forensic accounting conference in Chicago. I had excitedly mentioned this trip to my mother during a rare phone call 6 months ago, detailing how Lily was going to stay with a trusted friend while I flew out of state. They knew my house would be completely empty. They knew I would be 2 states away, unable to stop them from turning my home into a chaotic nightclub for 150 teenagers. But one terrifying question remained. How did they plan to get the caterers, the event planners, and the massive guest list inside my locked home while I was in Chicago? The answer hit me with the force of a freight train. 5 years ago, when Lily was a toddler and I had just bought the house, I suffered a brief medical emergency. I had given Linda an emergency spare key to the front door so she could come feed the cat while I was in the hospital. I never asked for the key back. She still had it. I knew the exact state of my parents' home, and it painted a pathetic picture of their priorities. The roof of their house was missing shingles, the gutters were constantly overflowing with dead leaves, and the kitchen had not been updated since the late 90s. The linoleum floors were peeling, and the appliances were constantly breaking down. They had spent every single dime they had keeping up appearances at their exclusive country club, leaving absolutely nothing for basic home maintenance or repairs. They bought luxury cars on terrible lease terms and wore designer clothes they put on high-interest credit cards. Hosting a 150-person luxury event at their decaying property was entirely out of the question. They needed a pristine modern venue to impress Haley's wealthy private school friends and their own shallow social circle. My fully renovated house with its open-concept living space, vaulted ceilings, and manicured backyard was the perfect target. And the absolute best part for them was that it would be completely free. They were going to hijack my home while I was sitting in a forensic accounting conference in Chicago. They assumed I would be none the wiser until I came home to a destroyed lawn and a house that smelled like stale party food. I could have picked up the phone and called the police right then. I could have sent the security footage to the family group chat and blown their entire scheme wide open for every aunt and uncle to see. But my forensic background had taught me that a premature confrontation was a tactical error. Confronting a narcissist without an airtight trap only gives them time to pivot to play the victim and to manipulate the narrative. If I called Linda out now, she would twist the story. She would tell the entire family that she was simply looking at my garden for inspiration, and that I was a paranoid crazy person who was overreacting to a simple backyard visit. I needed to let them walk right into their own trap. I needed them to commit to the crime so deeply that they could not lie their way out of it. I picked up my phone and opened my text messages. I typed a casual, breezy message to Linda, making sure my tone sounded perfectly normal. Just confirming I will be out of town for my conference starting Thursday morning, I wrote. I am going to be totally, completely off the grid and unreachable until Sunday night. Hope the party planning is going well. I hit send and watched the screen. My heart was thumping a steady, rhythmic beat against my ribs. Less than a minute later, a red receipt appeared, followed by 3 tiny typing dots. Linda replied with alarming speed. Have a wonderful trip, honey, she wrote. Do not worry about us at all. We have everything completely under control. I read her message and felt a cold, sharp smile stretch across my face. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought I was just the obedient scapegoat stepping aside so they could take what they wanted. I immediately opened my web browser and searched for the highest-rated commercial security company in the city. I did not want a standard neighborhood handyman. I wanted a professional who specialized in absolute lockdown. I called the number and requested an emergency residential overhaul. I told the dispatcher I did not care what it cost, but I needed someone at my house within the hour. A heavy white panel van pulled into my driveway 45 minutes later. A burly man named Mike stepped out carrying 2 massive tool bags that clinked with heavy hardware. I met him at the front door. I did not give him any family drama details or emotional backstory. I just gave him a simple direct order. I want every single entry point on this property secured, I told him. looking him dead in the eye. I want bump-proof high-security deadbolts on the front and back doors. I want the window latches upgraded, and I want the garage door code wiped and completely reset. Nobody gets in or out without my explicit permission. Mike nodded respectfully and went to work immediately. For the next 3 hours, my house echoed with the sound of power drills and heavy metal clanking against wood. He removed the old standard locks and replaced them with heavy-duty commercial-grade hardware. While he worked on the physical barriers, I focused entirely on the digital perimeter. I had already installed basic security cameras during the home renovation, but now I needed total, undeniable surveillance. I sat at my kitchen island and ordered 4 additional high-definition wireless cameras with night vision and two-way audio for overnight delivery. I wanted eyes on the driveway, the side gates, and every square inch of the backyard. I wanted overlapping fields of view so there would be absolutely no blind spots. I spent the afternoon syncing my existing cameras directly to my mobile phone and my secure private cloud server. I tested the live feeds, making sure the video quality was sharp enough to read a license plate. I set up aggressive motion alerts that would ping my phone the second anyone set foot on my grass. If Linda and David wanted to use my property, they were going to do it in full high-definition color. I walked through the house testing every new lock. The deadbolts slid into place with a satisfying heavy thud. The windows were locked down tight. My home, which had always been my safe haven, was now a fortress. I felt a surge of empowerment. For 33 years, my parents had crossed every boundary I ever tried to set. They had demanded my money, mocked my life choices, and completely disregarded my daughter. But they were not getting my house. The sun was starting to set, casting long, dark shadows across the backyard by the time Mike moved to the back patio door. I was standing in the kitchen pouring a glass of cold water when the sound of his drilling suddenly stopped. He was quiet for a long moment. Then I heard his heavy work boots walking across the hardwood floor toward me. He stopped at the edge of the kitchen island, holding the old brass deadbolt mechanism in his thick, calloused hand. He did not look happy. His brow was furrowed in concentration. "Miss," he said, his voice serious and hushed. "Did you recently have trouble opening this back door?" I shook my head, setting my water glass down on the granite counter. "No, it has been working perfectly fine. Why do you ask?" He placed the heavy brass cylinder on the white counter and pulled a small pen light from his shirt pocket. He shined the bright beam directly into the keyhole. "You might want to take a look at this," he murmured. I walked around the island and leaned in close, peering into the dark mechanism. At first I did not see anything unusual, just the standard pins and tumblers of an old lock. But as the beam of light shifted, catching the metallic edges inside, my breath caught in my throat. Lying in the grooves of the lock coating the bottom edge of the keyhole were tiny glittering flecks of freshly scraped metal. "There are fresh metal shavings inside the cylinder," Mike explained, pointing with the tip of a flathead screwdriver. "This only happens when someone forces a newly cut, unpolished key into a lock. Someone was not just walking around your backyard, miss. Someone was actively testing a spare key to make sure it still worked." I stared at the tiny metal shavings resting in the palm of Mike's hand. The implications crashed over me. Someone had not just wandered into my backyard to daydream about a party. They had actively inserted a freshly cut, unauthorized key into my back door to verify it would grant them full access to my home. My mother had not just kept the emergency spare key I gave her 5 years ago. She had taken it to a hardware store, duplicated it, and tested the copy. She was methodically preparing to invade my sanctuary. "Change everything," I told Mike, my voice dangerously quiet. "Every single lock. And if there is a higher security grade, upgrade it?" Mike nodded, putting the old cylinder into his tool bag. He spent another 2 hours fortifying my home. When he finally handed me the new set of keys, they felt heavy and cold in my palm. The keys were stamped with a specialized code, meaning they could not be duplicated at a standard hardware store without a matching security card. My house was officially impenetrable. The weekend arrived and the silence from my parents was deafening. They were playing the long game, assuming I was blissfully unaware of their master plan. They thought I was busy packing for my Chicago trip, completely oblivious to the luxury event planner measuring my patio. But the silence did not mean the family was at peace. It simply meant my parents had outsourced the conflict. Narcissists rarely fight their own battles when they can send proxies to do the dirty work. On Sunday afternoon, I was sitting at my kitchen island reviewing case files for a corporate embezzlement investigation. Lily was upstairs playing in her room. My phone vibrated across the granite countertop. The caller ID displayed the name of my mother's older sister, Aunt Barbara. Barbara was the ultimate family enforcer. She was a woman who thrived on drama gossip and maintaining the toxic status quo of our extended family. I knew exactly why she was calling, but I decided to answer anyway. I needed to know exactly what narrative my mother was spinning. Joanna, Barbara said the moment I accepted the call. Her voice dripped with fake syrupy sweetness that made my stomach turn. I am so glad I caught you at home. We really need to have a serious conversation about this ridiculous feud you are having with your parents. There is no feud, Aunt Barbara, I replied, keeping my tone flat and professional. I simply declined to give them $2,500 for a teenager's birthday party. That is not a feud, that is a financial boundary. Barbara let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. You are looking at this all wrong, honey. You are being completely unreasonable, and frankly, you are breaking your mother's heart. You know Haley is turning 16. It is a milestone. Your parents just want to give her a magical night, and you are being incredibly selfish by standing in their way. I am not standing in their way, I corrected her. They are welcome to throw whatever party they want. I am just not funding it. But you are standing in their way, Barbara insisted, her voice rising in pitch. Linda told me you are refusing to let them use your backyard for the event. Joanna, your house is sitting on half an acre of beautiful flat land. You have that massive patio and the new landscaping. It is the perfect venue. And you are going to be out of town in Chicago anyway. It makes absolutely no sense for you to be this stubborn. So there it was. My mother had already told the family her brilliant plan. She had painted me as the villain who was hoarding a perfectly good empty house out of pure spite. My house is not a public park, Aunt Barbara, I said, my grip tightening on my pen. It is my private residence. I do not want 150 teenagers trashing my property while I am in another state. Trash your property? Barbara scoffed loudly. Do not be so dramatic, Joanna. They are hiring a professional cleanup crew. Your mother has everything organized down to the smallest detail. You will not even know they were there. You owe them this, Joanna. They are your parents. They gave you life. They put a roof over your head for 18 years and raised you. The absolute least you can do is let them use your yard for one single weekend to celebrate your sister. I owe them nothing. I stated the words tasting like iron in my mouth. I paid my own way through college because they drained my entire college fund to pay for the IVF treatments that created Haley. I built my career from the ground up without a single dime or word of encouragement from them. I bought this house with my own money. They did not contribute to my down payment. They do not pay my mortgage, and they certainly do not pay my property taxes. I do not owe them my home. Family is family. Barbara snapped, her syrupy facade completely melting away. You hold on to the past like a weapon, Joanna. You need to let go of this bitterness. Your divorce has made you so hard and unapproachable. Just because your life did not turn out the way you wanted does not mean you get to ruin Haley's special day. You are acting like a spoiled brat. I felt a cold, calculating calm wash over me. The forensic accountant inside me took the wheel. I was no longer an emotional daughter dealing with abusive relatives. I was a professional dealing with a hostile witness. If they want a luxury venue for Haley, they can rent one, I said, my voice dropping to a low, even register. They are supposedly members of the Pine Valley Country Club. I saw my mother live streaming from their dining room just last week. Why do not they host the party in the club's grand ballroom? The line went completely silent. For a long, uncomfortable moment, all I could hear was Barbara's shallow breathing. I had struck a nerve. The country club was my mother's absolute pride and joy. She practically lived there. If they wanted to show off their wealth and status to Haley's friends, the club was the only logical choice. The fact that they were desperately trying to hijack my suburban backyard instead made absolutely no sense. They cannot do it at the club. Barbara finally mumbled, her tone losing all of its aggressive energy. Why not? I pressed, refusing to let her off the hook. Linda said they were sparing no expense. Why downgrade to a backyard barbecue? Barbara let out an exasperated, frustrated breath. Because they cannot afford the country club anymore, Joanna. Just let them have the yard. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with unintended consequence. Barbara immediately realized her mistake. I heard her gasp softly, a sharp intake of breath as she scrambled to cover up the devastating slip. I mean, she stammered quickly. I mean, the club is fully booked. They are renovating the ballroom. It is a logistical issue, not a financial one. Just stop being so difficult and give your mother the house keys. I have to go, Aunt Barbara, I said, completely ignoring her frantic backpedaling. Do not call me about this again. Joanna, do not you dare hang up on me. You listen to me right now. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the island. I sat back in my chair, staring blankly at the wall, as the sheer magnitude of what I had just learned began to take shape. They cannot afford the country club anymore. My parents were obsessed with appearances. They drove leased luxury cars they could not afford. They wore designer clothes bought on high-interest credit cards, and they viewed their country club membership as the ultimate symbol of their superiority. For them to lose that membership or fall so far behind on their dues that they were barred from booking the ballroom meant their financial situation was not just bad. It was catastrophic. They were drowning. But as I sat there turning the information over in my mind, a massive glaring discrepancy appeared. My professional instincts kicked into overdrive, my brain automatically organizing the data points into a mental ledger. I grabbed a fresh legal pad and a pen and started writing. Fact 1. My parents were so broke they could no longer afford their country club dues. Fact 2. My parents were desperately trying to steal my backyard because they could not afford to rent a legitimate venue. Fact 3. My security cameras had clearly captured a high-end luxury event planner walking through my property. Fact 4. That same event planner was discussing massive catering tents, custom dance floors, imported floral arches, and professional lighting rigs. I stared at the list, my pulse quickening as the terrifying math refused to add up. I knew exactly who that event planner was. I recognized her agency logo on her clipboard. She was the premier luxury planner in the city. Her agency did not do cheap backyard barbecues. They handled million-dollar weddings and elite corporate galas. She required a massive non-refundable retainer just to book a consultation, and her vendor deposits were astronomical. If my parents were broke, if they were defaulting on their country club fees and trying to hijack a free venue, then where was the money coming from? How was a financially ruined couple putting down five-figure deposits for luxury caterers, imported orchids, and elite event planners? They were spending money they definitively did not have, but they were spending it anyway, which meant they had found a new source of funds, a source they were keeping completely hidden. I pulled my laptop toward me and opened a secure browser window. My blood ran cold as a horrifying theory began to take root in my mind. They had drained my college fund 15 years ago without a second thought. They believed they were entitled to whatever resources they needed to maintain their lifestyle. And now they were suddenly flashing cash while simultaneously facing financial ruin. I needed to look into my own credit reports. I needed to check the deed to my house. If they had a copy of my house key, what else did they have access to? How exactly were my broke parents paying for a luxury party? I thanked Mike, the locksmith, paid his invoice in cash, and locked the new heavy-duty deadbolt behind him. The satisfying metallic clack echoed through the silent kitchen. The fresh metal shavings he had found inside my old lock were the final push I needed. My parents had crossed the line from toxic relatives to active trespassers. I walked straight up the stairs and into my home office. I closed the solid oak door, flipped the switch for the overhead lighting, and sat down in my ergonomic leather chair. I powered up my workstation, the dual monitors glowing to life and casting a cool blue light across the dark room. As a senior forensic accountant, my entire professional life revolved around following the money. I tracked hidden assets, exposed corporate fraud, and unraveled complex financial webs for high net worth clients and legal firms. People pay me hundreds of dollars an hour to find the truth buried beneath layers of deception. Now I was going to do it for free. I cracked my knuckles open a secure encrypted browser and logged into my professional databases. I bypassed standard search engines and went straight into public records, legal filings, and comprehensive credit networks. I had learned to navigate these systems out of absolute necessity. When I was 22 years old and applying for my very first post-college apartment, I was humiliated when the leasing agent slid my application back across the desk and told me my credit score was in the low 400s. I had never owned a credit card. I had never taken out a personal loan. But when I pulled my credit report, I found nearly $10,000 in unpaid utility bills, overdue notices, and severe collections penalties. My parents had secretly opened electric, gas, and water accounts in my name when I was 19 and living in my college dorm. They had used my social security number to keep their own lights on after their personal accounts were flagged for non-payment. They let the bills pile up for 3 years, destroying my financial reputation before my adult life had even begun. When I confronted them, Linda had cried fake tears, and David had screamed at me, stating that families share burdens and that I was selfish for caring about a stupid credit score when they had kept a roof over my head for 18 years. It took me 2 exhausting years of fighting utility companies, filing police reports for identity theft, and aggressively disputing the charges to finally clear my name. That brutal experience was the exact catalyst that drove me into forensic accounting. It taught me that the people who demand the most loyalty are usually the ones hiding the darkest secrets. I pulled up the state's Uniform Commercial Code filings and typed in David's full legal name. My father co-owned a mid-sized commercial supply company with 2 other partners. He always acted as the public face of the business, driving the least luxury vehicles and wearing the tailored suits. I started cross-referencing his business filings with his public property records and state tax liens. The digital paper trail was a mess of red flags. I pulled up the commercial property records for his warehouse and cross-checked the registered LLCs associated with his company. It did not take long to find the leak. I see this exact pattern in white-collar crime cases every single week. David had established a ghost LLC registered to a post office box in Delaware. He was systematically funneling small but consistent payments from the primary business accounts into this dummy corporation, billing them as consulting fees and independent contractor expenses. He was bleeding his own company dry. He was embezzling funds straight out of the pockets of his business partners to maintain the illusion of his own wealth. The money was being immediately redirected from the Delaware account to pay for Linda's exorbitant country club minimums, her leased luxury SUV, and their mounting credit card payments. They were living month to month on stolen corporate funds. If his partners ever ordered a baseline independent audit, David would be facing federal wire fraud and embezzlement charges. I sat back in my chair, letting out a slow breath. David was a fraud. He was projecting his own failures onto me, calling me a miserable failure, while he was actively stealing from his associates just to keep his head above water. But as damning as David's financial crimes were, they did not explain the current cash flow. Embezzling small amounts to cover car payments was one thing. Putting down massive 5-figure deposits for a luxury Sweet 16 party required a sudden large influx of liquid cash. I shifted my focus to my mother. Linda had not worked a legitimate job in over 20 years. She viewed employment as something beneath her social standing. I accessed a secured credit verification network. Since my parents had previously stolen my identity, I legally retained the right to monitor their public credit profiles through a fraud protection service I had linked to their home address. I ran a soft inquiry on Linda's name. Nothing unusual popped up. Her personal credit cards were completely maxed out, just as I suspected. She had no new lines of credit and no recent personal loans. I tapped my pen against my desk, the rhythm matching the racing of my thoughts. If Linda was flat broke and David's embezzlement was only keeping them afloat, where did the deposit money come from? I stared at the blinking cursor on my monitor. A sickening thought crept into my mind, a realization so dark and twisted that my hands actually hovered over the keyboard. They had stolen my identity when I was a teenager, to pay their bills. They had zero moral boundaries when it came to maintaining their lifestyle. I typed in Haley's full legal name and date of birth. I accessed the identity verification database and ran a comprehensive sweep using my sister's social security number. The results loaded onto the screen in less than 5 seconds. I literally gasped, pushing myself back from the desk as the sheer magnitude of my mother's betrayal stared back at me in stark black and white text. 3 brand new premium high-limit credit cards had been opened in the last 45 days. The primary account holder was listed as Haley. My mother had falsified income statements claiming her 15-year-old daughter was a high-earning independent consultant to bypass the age and income restrictions. Linda had stolen her golden child's identity. I clicked into the current balances. The first card, an Elite Travel Rewards card, carried a balance of $12,000. The second, a premium retail card, was sitting at $14,000. The third, a Platinum card used primarily for large vendor transactions, was maxed out at $18,000. $44,000 in high-interest debt. Linda had taken out $44,000 in Haley's name to pay the luxury event planner, the caterers, and the florists. She was funding the ultimate enchanted forest aesthetic by completely destroying Haley's financial future before the girl was even old enough to apply for a learner's permit. A wave of genuine disgust washed over me. I detested the way Haley treated me. I hated her spoiled, entitled attitude and her cruel voice memos. But she was a 15-year-old child. She had absolutely no idea that the mother she worshipped, the mother who was supposedly throwing her the party of a lifetime, had just ruined her life. When Haley eventually turned 18 and tried to apply for student loans or get an apartment, she was going to face the exact same horrifying realization I had faced. The golden child was nothing more than a fresh line of credit. I saved the credit reports, downloading the encrypted files directly to an external hard drive. I now had definitive proof of grand larceny, identity theft, and corporate embezzlement. But I needed the final piece of the puzzle. I needed to know exactly how they were planning to execute this party on my property while I was in Chicago. I navigated away from the financial databases and opened the portal for the city's municipal permit office. The event planner they hired was a high-end professional. She would never operate an event with 150 guests, catering tents and professional sound equipment without securing the proper city permits. If she did, the city could shut the party down within 20 minutes and fine her agency thousands of dollars. I typed my own home address into the public permit search bar and hit enter. A green approved status bar flashed across my screen. The event planner had indeed filed a special event permit for a large-scale residential gathering at my exact address for the third weekend of the month. The permit listed the expected guest count, the noise variance requests for the DJ, and the structural approvals for the catering tents in the backyard. I scrolled down to the bottom of the permit application. The city required a certificate of liability insurance for any residential event exceeding 100 guests to protect the city from property damage claims or underage drinking liabilities. There was a blue hyperlink indicating an attached PDF document. I clicked the link. The PDF opened, displaying an official certificate of liability insurance from a major national insurance provider. I zoomed in on the document, scanning the incredibly detailed text. The policy named my residential home as the official commercial venue for the event. But it was the signature line at the bottom of the document that made my blood run freezing cold. Printed clearly in blue ink was my full legal name, signing away my property rights and assuming complete personal liability for 150 teenagers and a commercial catering crew. My mother had not just forged my signature. She had submitted a completely fabricated and highly illegal insurance document to a government office. I stared at the forged signature on my screen. My own name looped and slanted in a way that mimicked my handwriting just enough to pass a casual glance by a city clerk. My mother had committed felony fraud. She had legally bound me to a commercial insurance policy for an event I had explicitly forbidden on property I owned. If one teenager drank too much and tripped over a landscaping stone, or if a catering heat lamp sparked a fire on the patio, I would be the one facing the massive liability lawsuit. I would be the one losing my home, my savings, and my professional license. My mother was willing to risk my entire future for a party aesthetic. I did not panic. I did not cry. The betrayal was so absolute, so entirely devoid of any maternal instinct, that it simply severed the last remaining emotional string attaching me to my parents. The forensic accountant inside me took total control, shutting down the wounded daughter. I clicked the download icon. I saved the forged insurance policy into a secure encrypted folder alongside David's corporate embezzlement trail and Linda's fraudulent credit card accounts. Linda had ruined 15-year-old Haley's financial future to buy flower walls and imported appetizers. When Haley eventually turned 18 and tried to apply for student loans or rent her first apartment, she would face a devastating wall of high-interest debt and defaulted collections. The golden child was being sacrificed on the altar of my mother's ego just as surely as I had been. I created 3 separate backups of the entire digital dossier, syncing them to a private cloud server and saving a hard copy onto a physical encrypted flash drive. The evidence was locked down airtight and utterly damning. I had them dead to rights. With the financial forensics complete and secured, it was time to move to the physical logistics of my trap. My parents fully believed I was flying to Chicago on Thursday morning. I needed to maintain that illusion perfectly while ensuring they walked blindly into the concrete wall I had just built around my life. I logged out of my workstation, shut down the monitors, and walked down the hardwood hallway to my daughter's room. Lily was sitting on her colorful alphabet rug, carefully assembling a large wooden puzzle. I knelt beside her, taking a deep breath to ensure my energy was calm and completely normal. I offered her a bright, relaxed smile. I told her we were changing our plans for the weekend. I explained that instead of her staying with the regular babysitter while I went to a boring work conference in another state, we were going to do something much more fun. I told her she was going to spend a long extended weekend with her best friend Chloe, while I stayed at a local luxury hotel for a quiet spa retreat. Lily's eyes lit up immediately, dropping her puzzle piece. She loved Chloe's house, and she absolutely loved the idea of a surprise multiple-day sleepover. I pulled her small pink rolling suitcase from the closet and let her help me pack. We folded her favorite pajamas, her school clothes, and enough toys and books to keep her happily occupied. Then I went to my own master bedroom and packed a sleek leather overnight bag. I did not pack business suits or conference attire. I packed comfortable loungewear, soft yoga pants, and my heavy-duty noise-canceling headphones. Thursday morning arrived with crisp, cool air and bright sunshine. I loaded Lily and our bags into my SUV, making sure to lock the new heavy commercial deadbolts of my house behind me. I tested the front door handle twice, ensuring the heavy brass mechanism held firm. I pulled out of the driveway, leaving my house looking perfectly normal, and headed straight to Chloe's house. Her mother, Sarah, was one of my oldest and most trusted friends. I had briefly explained the situation to Sarah over the phone the night before. I left out the felony fraud and embezzlement details, but made it explicitly clear that my parents were attempting a massive boundary violation and that Lily needed to be completely insulated from any potential fallout. Sarah understood immediately. She had witnessed my mother's toxic behavior for years. Sarah hugged me fiercely at the door, promising that Lily would be treated like royalty, fed too much ice cream, and kept entirely off the radar. I instructed Sarah not to answer the door if my parents somehow showed up, and to keep her own security cameras engaged. After kissing my daughter goodbye and watching her run happily into Sarah's playroom, I climbed back into my car. I sat behind the wheel in the quiet suburban street holding my phone. I opened the family group chat, taking a moment to craft the perfect message. I typed a quick, breezy text stating I was sitting at the airport gate waiting to board my flight to Chicago. I added that I was exhausted from preparing for the conference and would be putting my phone on airplane mode for the entire travel day and likely staying offline through the weekend to focus on my seminars. Less than 2 minutes later, my screen illuminated with a reply from my mother. "Have a wonderful time, sweetie," she wrote, adding a string of colorful heart emojis. "Focus on your work and do not worry about a single thing back home." The sheer audacity of her response made me smile, a sharp, humorless smile. I locked my phone screen, tossing the device onto the passenger seat. I put my car in drive and turned exactly the opposite direction of the airport. I was not going to Chicago. I was going exactly 3 miles down the highway to the Grand Monarch, an upscale luxury hotel that offered panoramic views of the skyline and lightning-fast fiber optic internet. I pulled into the hotel's covered portico, handed my keys to the valet, and checked into a premium corner suite I had booked the night before under my corporate account. The room was immaculate, featuring a plush, king-sized bed, a sprawling marble bathroom, and a large, sleek glass desk facing the floor-to-ceiling windows. But I did not care about the view of the city. I cared about the desk. I unzipped my leather bag and pulled out my primary laptop, a secondary portable monitor, and a high-speed encrypted mobile hotspot. I arranged them precisely on the glass surface, establishing my command center. I plugged the laptop into the power source, connected the dual screens, and logged into my secure private network. I opened the proprietary application for my home security system. 6 high-definition camera feeds populated across my dual monitors. The resolution was crystal clear, capturing every inch of my property in real time. I saw the front porch, the wide driveway, the locked side gates, and the expansive backyard with its fresh landscaping and pristine patio. The sun was shining on my empty suburban fortress. The new bump-proof commercial deadbolts were engaged. The window latches were locked down tight. The garage door code was wiped and reset to a randomized 32-character sequence. Nobody was getting inside without an explosive device or a battering ram. I spent Thursday afternoon and the entirety of Friday sitting at that glass desk sipping room service coffee and watching the digital feeds. I tested the two-way audio on the cameras, ensuring the microphones were picking up the ambient street noise, and the speakers were functioning perfectly. Occasionally, a delivery truck would pass my house, or a neighbor would walk their dog down the sidewalk, triggering a minor motion alert. My phone remained strictly silent. My parents were completely ignoring my supposed absence, busy preparing for the grand spectacle they thought they were going to host. I meticulously reviewed the timeline I had constructed from the city permits. According to the forged documents, the luxury event planner was scheduled to begin the massive property transformation early Saturday morning. They needed ample time to erect the commercial catering tents, install the custom dance floor, set up the staging, and configure the professional lighting rigs well before the 150 guests were slated to arrive at 7 o'clock that evening. Friday night dragged on at a glacial pace. I ordered a steak dinner from the hotel restaurant, reviewed the downloaded financial dossiers one final time, and eventually forced myself to lie down on the hotel bed. I kept the laptop open on the desk, the soft blue glow of the camera feeds illuminating the dark hotel room. I slept lightly, tossing and turning, my ears tuned for any alert sound from my mobile device. Saturday morning broke with a pale gray light filtering through the heavy hotel curtains. It was 6:15 in the morning. The city was still asleep. A sharp rhythmic chime cut through the total silence of the hotel suite. My eyes snapped open. I threw off the heavy white duvet and moved instantly to the glass desk. My phone was vibrating aggressively on the surface, displaying an urgent push notification from my security system. Motion detected. Driveway camera. I touched the trackpad, instantly waking up the dual monitors. The live feed from the front of my house filled the large screen. A massive white commercial box truck was backing slowly and deliberately up to my curb. The side of the large truck was emblazoned with the elegant gold lettering of the city's most exclusive luxury catering company. The heavy air brakes hissed loudly as the vehicle shifted into park. 2 men in matching black polo shirts hopped out of the cab, walking around to unlatch the heavy rear doors of the truck. The invasion had officially begun. They had arrived exactly on schedule, walking blindly into the trap. I leaned closer to the monitor, watching the feed in vivid high definition. My pulse was a slow, steady drumbeat of anticipation. I reached for my cold coffee cup, took a slow, deliberate sip, and waited for the show to start. I stared at the forged signature on my screen. My own name looped and slanted in a way that mimicked my handwriting just enough to pass a casual glance by a city clerk. My mother had committed felony fraud. She had legally bound me to a commercial insurance policy for an event I had explicitly forbidden on property I owned. If one teenager drank too much and tripped over a landscaping stone, or if a catering heat lamp sparked a fire on the patio, I would be the one facing the massive liability lawsuit. I would be the one losing my home, my savings, and my professional license. My mother was willing to risk my entire future for a party aesthetic. I did not panic. I did not cry. The betrayal was so absolute, so entirely devoid of any maternal instinct, that it simply severed the last remaining emotional string attaching me to my parents. The forensic accountant inside me took total control, shutting down the wounded daughter. I clicked the download icon. I saved the forged insurance policy into a secure encrypted folder alongside David's corporate embezzlement trail and Linda's fraudulent credit card accounts. Linda had ruined 15-year-old Haley's financial future to buy flower walls and imported appetizers. When Haley eventually turned 18 and tried to apply for student loans or rent her first apartment, she would face a devastating wall of high-interest debt and defaulted collections. The golden child was being sacrificed on the altar of my mother's ego just as surely as I had been. I created 3 separate backups of the entire digital dossier, syncing them to a private cloud server and saving a hard copy onto a physical encrypted flash drive. The evidence was locked down airtight and utterly damning. I had them dead to rights. With the financial forensics complete and secured, it was time to move to the physical logistics of my trap. My parents fully believed I was flying to Chicago on Thursday morning. I needed to maintain that illusion perfectly while ensuring they walked blindly into the concrete wall I had just built around my life. I logged out of my workstation, shut down the monitors, and walked down the hardwood hallway to my daughter's room. Lily was sitting on her colorful alphabet rug, carefully assembling a large wooden puzzle. I knelt beside her, taking a deep breath to ensure my energy was calm and completely normal. I offered her a bright, relaxed smile. I told her we were changing our plans for the weekend. I explained that instead of her staying with the regular babysitter while I went to a boring work conference in another state, we were going to do something much more fun. I told her she was going to spend a long extended weekend with her best friend Chloe, while I stayed at a local luxury hotel for a quiet spa retreat. Lily's eyes lit up immediately, dropping her puzzle piece. She loved Chloe's house, and she absolutely loved the idea of a surprise multiple-day sleepover. I pulled her small pink rolling suitcase from the closet and let her help me pack. We folded her favorite pajamas, her school clothes, and enough toys and books to keep her happily occupied. Then I went to my own master bedroom and packed a sleek leather overnight bag. I did not pack business suits or conference attire. I packed comfortable loungewear, soft yoga pants, and my heavy-duty noise-canceling headphones. Thursday morning arrived with crisp, cool air and bright sunshine. I loaded Lily and our bags into my SUV, making sure to lock the new heavy commercial deadbolts of my house behind me. I tested the front door handle twice, ensuring the heavy brass mechanism held firm. I pulled out of the driveway, leaving my house looking perfectly normal, and headed straight to Chloe's house. Her mother, Sarah, was one of my oldest and most trusted friends. I had briefly explained the situation to Sarah over the phone the night before. I left out the felony fraud and embezzlement details, but made it explicitly clear that my parents were attempting a massive boundary violation and that Lily needed to be completely insulated from any potential fallout. Sarah understood immediately. She had witnessed my mother's toxic behavior for years. Sarah hugged me fiercely at the door, promising that Lily would be treated like royalty, fed too much ice cream, and kept entirely off the radar. I instructed Sarah not to answer the door if my parents somehow showed up, and to keep her own security cameras engaged. After kissing my daughter goodbye and watching her run happily into Sarah's playroom, I climbed back into my car. I sat behind the wheel in the quiet suburban street holding my phone. I opened the family group chat, taking a moment to craft the perfect message. I typed a quick, breezy text stating I was sitting at the airport gate waiting to board my flight to Chicago. I added that I was exhausted from preparing for the conference and would be putting my phone on airplane mode for the entire travel day and likely staying offline through the weekend to focus on my seminars. Less than 2 minutes later, my screen illuminated with a reply from my mother. "Have a wonderful time, sweetie," she wrote, adding a string of colorful heart emojis. "Focus on your work, and do not worry about a single thing back home." The sheer audacity of her response made me smile a sharp, humorless smile. I locked my phone screen, tossing the device onto the passenger seat. I put my car in drive and turned exactly the opposite direction of the airport. I was not going to Chicago. I was going exactly 10 minutes down the highway to the Grand Monarch, an upscale luxury hotel that offered panoramic views of the skyline and lightning-fast fiber optic internet. I pulled into the hotel's covered portico, handed my keys to the valet, and checked into a premium corner suite I had booked the night before under my corporate account. The room was immaculate, featuring a plush king-sized bed, a sprawling marble bathroom, and a large, sleek glass desk facing the floor-to-ceiling windows. But I did not care about the view of the city, I cared about the desk. I unzipped my leather bag and pulled out my primary laptop, a secondary portable monitor, and a high-speed encrypted mobile hotspot. I arranged them precisely on the glass surface, establishing my command center. I plugged the laptop into the power source, connected the dual screens, and logged into my secure private network. I opened the proprietary application for my home security system. 6 high-definition camera feeds populated across my dual monitors. The resolution was crystal clear, capturing every inch of my property in real time. I saw the front porch, the wide driveway, the locked side gates, and the expansive backyard with its fresh landscaping and pristine patio. The sun was shining on my empty suburban fortress. The new bump-proof commercial deadbolts were engaged, the window latches were locked down tight, the garage door code was wiped and reset to a randomized 32-character sequence. Nobody was getting inside without an explosive device or a battering ram. I spent Thursday afternoon and the entirety of Friday sitting at that glass desk, sipping room service coffee and watching the digital feeds. I tested the two-way audio on the cameras, ensuring the microphones were picking up the ambient street noise, and the speakers were functioning perfectly. Occasionally, a delivery truck would pass my house or a neighbor would walk their dog down the sidewalk, triggering a minor motion alert. My phone remained strictly silent. My parents were completely ignoring my supposed absence, busy preparing for the grand spectacle they thought they were going to host. I meticulously reviewed the timeline I had constructed from the city permits. According to the forged documents, the luxury event planner was scheduled to begin the massive property transformation early Saturday morning. They needed ample time to erect the commercial catering tents, install the custom dance floor, set up the staging, and configure the professional lighting rigs well before the 150 guests were slated to arrive at 7 o'clock that evening. Friday night dragged on at a glacial pace. I ordered a steak dinner from the hotel restaurant, reviewed the downloaded financial dossiers one final time, and eventually forced myself to lie down on the hotel bed. I kept the laptop open on the desk, the soft blue glow of the camera feeds illuminating the dark hotel room. I slept lightly, tossing and turning, my ears tuned for any alert sound from my mobile device. Early Saturday morning, my phone buzzed sharply against the glass desk. It was 6:15. The city was still asleep. I threw off the heavy white duvet and moved instantly to the command center. My screen displayed an urgent push notification from my security system alerting me to motion in the driveway. I touched the trackpad, instantly waking up the dual monitors. The live feed from the front of my house filled the large screen. A massive luxury catering truck with a pristine white exterior was backing slowly and deliberately up to the curb of my house. The side of the large vehicle was emblazoned with the elegant gold lettering of the city's most exclusive culinary team. The heavy air brakes hissed loudly as the vehicle shifted into park. 2 men in matching black polo shirts hopped out of the cab, walking around to unlatch the heavy rear doors. The invasion force had officially arrived. They had shown up exactly on schedule, walking blindly into the perimeter of my trap. I leaned closer to the monitor, watching the feed in vivid high definition. My pulse was a slow, steady drumbeat of anticipation. I reached for my cold coffee cup, took a slow, deliberate sip, and waited. 10 minutes later, a sleek black Cadillac Escalade turned onto my quiet suburban street. It was a current year model polished to a mirror shine and sporting a small rental fleet barcode on the windshield. It parked directly behind the catering truck. David was the first to step out. He was wearing pristine khaki slacks and a pastel blue cashmere sweater, completely leaning into the wealthy estate owner aesthetic. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the door. Linda emerged, looking like she was stepping onto a red carpet. She wore a tailored white linen jumpsuit, oversized designer sunglasses, and carried a quilted leather handbag that easily cost $3,000. Finally, Haley slid out of the back seat. She was heavily styled already in full diva mode, holding an iced coffee in one hand and her phone in the other, aggressively chewing gum and looking at my house with a critically bored expression. Following closely behind the rented SUV was a staggering fleet of commercial vehicles. A massive box truck bearing the logo of a premier floral design studio parked across the street. A flatbed truck carrying sections of a portable wooden dance floor and heavy steel lighting trusses idled near my mailbox. A dedicated sound equipment van pulled up behind them. The sheer volume of hardware and personnel descending on my property was breathtaking. Linda had truly maxed out those 3 fraudulent credit cards to their absolute limits to purchase this magnificent illusion. A woman stepped out of a silver sedan carrying a thick silver clipboard and wearing a sharp black pantsuit. It was the luxury event planner. She approached my parents, extending a hand to Linda. I turned up the volume on the camera's 2-way audio feed. "Sylvia, darling," my mother practically sang, projecting her voice so the entire catering crew would hear. Linda extended her hand, adjusting her oversized sunglasses. She was completely in her element, brimming with arrogant entitlement as she barked orders at the surrounding crew. "Carefully with those boxes, gentlemen," she yelled toward the caterers. Then she turned back to the planner, pointing a perfectly manicured finger toward the backyard. "I want the main floral arch centered perfectly on the patio stairs." The event planner tapped her pen against the clipboard, looking at her watch. "It is a beautiful property, Mrs. Wilson, but we are on a very strict timeline. The lighting crew needs 4 hours to rig the trusses, and the florists have imported orchids that need temperature control immediately. We need access to the interior of the house right now to set up the staging areas and tap into your main power grid." Of course," Linda said, waving her hand dismissively. "Follow me." She turned and marched confidently up my slate front steps. David and the event planner trailed closely behind her, followed by the foreman of the lighting crew. I leaned closer to my monitor. I watched my mother reach into her expensive quilted handbag. She rummaged around for a moment before pulling out her old tarnished spare key. It was the emergency key I had given her half a decade ago. The key she had secretly duplicated to test my locks. The key she firmly believed granted her absolute dominion over my life. Linda stepped up to my front door. She did not hesitate. She simply inserted the brass key into the brand new heavy-duty commercial deadbolt Mike the locksmith had installed just days prior. The key slides in but refuses to turn. Linda shoves her weight against the heavy wooden door, but it does not budge, and the event planner taps her watch impatiently. Linda twisted her wrist violently, and the brass key groaned against the internal tumblers of the high-security lock. I watched her through the high-definition monitor as she yanked the key out and jammed it back in with frantic, aggressive force. She stepped back, her crisp white linen jumpsuit wrinkling at the waist, and threw her shoulder directly against the heavy oak door. The impact made a dull thud that echoed through the hidden porch microphone, but the door frame did not even rattle. Mike the locksmith had done his job flawlessly. The door remained an immovable solid wall of wood and reinforced steel. Sylvia, the luxury event planner, let out a sharp, audible breath. She tapped her expensive gold pen against her thick silver clipboard and checked her diamond wristwatch. Her crew was entirely on the clock, and every minute they stood idling on my front porch was bleeding money from her profit margins. I leaned forward in my ergonomic hotel chair, sliding my heavy noise-canceling headphones securely over my ears. I wanted to hear every single breath, every panicked whisper, and every desperate lie my mother was about to spin. I turned the volume dial on the primary audio feed all the way up. Linda spun around to face David, her perfectly manicured facade cracking right down the middle. The elegant, wealthy estate owner persona vanished instantly, replaced by the furious, venomous woman I knew all too well. She shoved the tarnished key into David's chest. "David, the key is completely stuck," she hissed, keeping her voice low so the vendors unpacking the trucks would not hear her. "Do something right now. Force it open." David stumbled backward, catching the key before it hit the porch floor. He stepped up to the door, his pastel blue cashmere sweater looking entirely out of place as he fumbled with the lock. He pushed the key into the cylinder and jiggled the handle, his face turning a blotchy shade of crimson as he realized the mechanism was completely unyielding. "Linda, it is not turning," he whispered back, his voice laced with rising panic. "This is not the right key. It feels like the pins inside the lock are completely different." "Of course it is the right key, you absolute idiot!" Linda snapped her eyes, darting nervously toward the street where the massive catering truck was idling. "It is the spare Joanna gave me 5 years ago. I just had it tested at the hardware store last week. The girl is in Chicago. She did not change the locks. Just put your shoulder into it and break the latch if you have to." I sat in my quiet hotel suite, feeling a cold rush of adrenaline wash over me. My mother was ordering her husband to physically break into my home. It was a pattern of behavior I knew intimately. When I was 17, I had purchased a heavy-duty padlock for my bedroom door to protect my small jar of waitressing tips from my mother's constant borrowing. Linda had thrown an absolute fit, demanding access to my room. When I refused, she turned to David and ordered him to retrieve a crowbar from the garage. I watched my father silently and obediently splinter my bedroom doorframe without a single second of hesitation simply because Linda demanded it. David was not an innocent bystander in my mother's reign of terror. He was her designated enforcer, and he was preparing to do her dirty work once again. Haley let out a loud, exaggerated groan from the bottom of the porch steps. She shifted her weight dramatically, rolling her eyes behind her designer sunglasses. "Mom? Can we just go inside already?" she whined, swirling the melting ice in her plastic coffee cup. "My feet are freezing and I need to plug my phone in before the hair and makeup team gets here. I cannot be out here in the humidity, my hair is going to frizz." "Just wait 1 second, sweetie," Linda cooed, her tone instantly softening for her golden child, before snapping back to a harsh whisper for David. "I swear to God, David, if you do not get this door open right now, I will make you regret it." Before David could throw his weight against the wood again, heavy footsteps sounded on the driveway pavement. A man wearing a pristine, double-breasted white chef's coat and black checkered trousers marched up the walkway. He was the lead caterer from the luxury culinary team, and he did not look happy. He bypassed Sylvia entirely and stepped directly onto my front porch, invading Linda's personal space. "Mrs. Wilson, we have a serious logistical problem," the chef stated, his voice carrying the sharp, authoritative tone of a man running a high-stress kitchen. "My staff is currently sitting on a $10,000 menu inside that truck. We have imported Wagyu beef, delicate seafood selections, and temperature-sensitive artisanal cheeses that require immediate and continuous refrigeration. The cooling units on my transport vehicles are temporary. They are meant for transit only, not for staging." Linda blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to process the culinary demands. "We just need a few more minutes," she stammered, taking a subtle step away from the door. "I do not have a few more minutes," the chef interrupted, pointing a stern finger back toward his pristine white truck. "I need my prep team inside that kitchen immediately. I need to establish my staging areas, sanitize the commercial prep surfaces, and transfer the proteins into your main refrigerators. If I do not have full unrestricted access to your kitchen within the next 10 minutes, I am legally obligated to pull the plug on this entire operation. I will not violate municipal health codes, and I absolutely will not assume the liability for serving spoiled luxury ingredients to 150 teenagers. If that food goes bad, the financial loss falls entirely on you. The tension on the porch skyrocketed. The foreman of the lighting and sound crew, a burly man wearing a heavy tool belt over his jeans, stepped up right behind the chef. He crossed his arms over his chest, adding his own weight to the mounting pressure. "He is right, lady," the foreman grunted. "My crew is standing around burning daylight. We have union rules dictating our operating hours. I need to get my guys into your basement to access the main breaker panel. We are running massive lighting trusses and dual DJ subwoofers tonight. I cannot pull that kind of voltage off a standard exterior patio outlet without blowing every fuse in your neighborhood. We need inside access right now to hardwire our external generators to your primary grid. Time is money." Through my monitors, I watched Linda visually shrink. She was surrounded by working-class professionals demanding access to a property she did not own. The walls were rapidly closing in on her. If she admitted that she was locked out, the vendors would immediately realize she was not the homeowner. The entire grand illusion of her wealth and power would shatter in front of an audience. She could not look poor. She could not look like a desperate trespasser hijacking a suburban house. Her narcissism simply would not allow her to admit defeat. Linda took a deep breath. I watched her physically push her shoulders back and lift her chin. She switched seamlessly into her country club persona. The transformation was chilling to witness. She plastered a bright, beaming, completely artificial smile across her face and let out a light, tinkling laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Oh, you boys are just so dramatic," Linda laughed, waving her hand gracefully through the air as if she were swatting away a minor annoyance. "Please do not worry yourselves. It is just these beautiful old vintage locks. The humidity this time of year always warps the wood on my property. It makes the mechanisms a bit sticky." She placed her hand flat against the heavy oak door, possessing the space with absolute delusional confidence. "This is my home, gentlemen," she declared, her voice dripping with arrogant superiority. "I know all of its little quirks. My husband is just going to run around to the back and pop open the patio slider. We will have the entire house opened up for you in a jiffy. Please tell your wonderful crews to go ahead and start unloading the staging equipment onto the front lawn. We will be ready for you in exactly 5 minutes." The chef narrowed his eyes, clearly unconvinced by her breezy attitude, but he nodded slowly. "5 minutes, Mrs. Wilson. Not a minute longer." The vendors turned around and walked back down the driveway toward their respective trucks. The heavy thud of their boots faded into the background. The exact second the chef turned his back, the fake tinkling smile vanished from my mother's face. It was completely wiped away, replaced by a mask of desperate, furious, and unhinged determination. The reality of her situation had finally breached her delusion. She was out of time. She was out of excuses. The $44,000 of fraudulent debt she had chained to Haley's name was about to evaporate in the morning sun if she did not get inside my house immediately. She spun around and grabbed David by the forearm, her manicured nails digging violently into the soft fabric of his blue cashmere sweater. She dragged him roughly toward the far edge of the porch, out of the direct line of sight from the street. I leaned closer to the monitor, my breath catching in my throat as I anticipated her next move. Linda pointed a trembling, rigid finger directly down at the landscaping bordering the porch. Specifically, she pointed at the large, heavy decorative river rocks I had meticulously placed around my hydrangeas just last spring. "Pick up a rock, David!" she ordered, her voice a low, guttural growl that crackled through my headphones. "Go around to the side of the house where the catering crew cannot see you. Smash the dining room window, reach your arm through the glass, and unlock the side door from the inside. Do it right now." David stood entirely frozen on the edge of my pristine garden, holding a heavy gray riverstone in both his hands. The sheer absurdity of the moment seemed to finally pierce through his habitual obedience. He looked at the heavy, reinforced glass of my dining room window, and then cast a frantic, paranoid glance up and down the quiet suburban street. The neighborhood was wide awake and highly observant. Mrs. Gable from directly across the street was already standing on her front porch, watering a hanging fern that required absolutely no water, holding a bright yellow watering can while staring intently at my driveway. 2 houses down, a man was walking a golden retriever, pausing deliberately at the corner stop sign to watch the chaotic spectacle of the massive catering trucks idling on the curb. David lowered the rock, his chest heaving under his pastel blue cashmere sweater. He shook his head, stepping backward away from the flower bed. His self-preservation had finally overridden my mother's command. He dropped the heavy stone back into the landscaping mulch and wiped his sweating palms on his khaki slacks. He was entirely stripped of his wealthy patriarch persona. In that moment, he was just a terrified man, standing on a lawn realizing he was about to commit a felony, breaking and entering in broad daylight in front of an audience of highly paid event vendors. Linda looked at him as if he had just spat on her designer shoes, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. She stepped toward him, her voice dropping into a vicious, serrated whisper that my hidden porch microphone picked up with absolute crystalline clarity. She berated him for his cowardice, calling him useless, pathetic, and weak. She reminded him in a venomous hiss that $44,000 was riding on this single event, and the vendors were seconds away from walking off the job and taking their non-refundable deposits with them. David just stood there looking down at his expensive leather loafers, shaking his head. "I cannot do it, Linda," he whispered back, his voice trembling. "There are people watching. If I smash that glass, the neighbors will call the cops. We will be arrested right here on the grass." The luxury event planner Sylvia cleared her throat loudly from the bottom of the front steps, her professional patience entirely exhausted. She announced in a sharp-clipped tone that she was calling her dispatch office to pull her crews. The lead chef was already marching back to his pristine white truck, pulling his ignition keys from his pocket and shouting orders to his sous chefs to secure the refrigeration units. The burly foreman of the lighting crew shook his head, turned around and signaled for his men to start loading the heavy steel trusses back onto the flatbed. The magnificent, expensive illusion was rapidly disintegrating right in front of my mother's eyes. Linda whipped around, her rising panic morphing into a terrifying kind of clarity. She could not look poor. She could not look like a desperate trespasser hijacking a suburban house. Her narcissism simply would not allow her to admit defeat or confess her lack of ownership in front of this elite workforce. She held up her hand, commanding them all to stop. She promised in a shrill, desperate voice that she was resolving the issue right this very second. She reached into her quilted leather handbag and pulled out her smartphone. Her entire physical demeanor shifted instantly. The furious, venomous monster that had just berated her husband vanished completely. In its place emerged the distressed, outraged, and entirely entitled victim. She took a deep breath, physically adjusting her posture, smoothing the front of her white linen jumpsuit, and pushed her designer sunglasses further up the bridge of her nose. She tapped 3 numbers into her touchscreen and raised the device to her ear. I sat in my silent hotel room, gripping the edge of the glass desk. The high-speed audio feed crackled softly through my heavy noise-canceling headphones as the emergency dispatcher answered the call. Linda spoke with a perfectly modulated tone of frantic distress. She identified herself as the property owner, providing my exact address without a single stutter of hesitation. She told the dispatcher that she was facing a severe and escalating emergency. She claimed a disgruntled former tenant had maliciously changed the locks on her property out of pure spite. She wove a masterful, flawless lie explaining that she was hosting a massive, highly expensive catered charity event starting in just 2 hours, and the vendors were currently blocked from entering her home. She demanded that police officers be dispatched to the residence immediately to assist her in breaking the lock and regaining lawful access to her own property. She insisted that the situation was dire and required immediate police intervention to prevent the loss of tens of thousands of dollars in perishable goods and event equipment. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of her lie resonated through my headphones, vibrating against my eardrums. She was not just trespassing, she was actively attempting to weaponize local law enforcement to facilitate a break-in. She fully intended to look a uniformed police officer in the eye, point at my front door, and command them to pry it open based entirely on the absolute delusion that she owned my life, my assets, and everything I had ever worked for. A cold electric thrill shot straight down my spine. I had anticipated that she would throw a massive tantrum on the lawn. I had fully expected her to scream at the vendors or try to force a back window with a garden tool. But calling the police and filing a false emergency report to break into my house was a magnificent gift I had not even dared to dream of. She was handing me the final iron nail for her own coffin. She was locking herself inside a cage of her own making. The audio feed captured Sylvia stepping tentatively up the porch stairs, asking Linda if everything was all right. Linda turned to the event planner, wiping a completely manufactured tear from the corner of her eye. She played the part of the wealthy, besieged homeowner beautifully. She assured Sylvia with a trembling voice that the police were on their way to deal with the malicious vandalism and that they would have the doors opened momentarily. She actually turned toward the driveway and offered to pay the angry chef a substantial cash bonus for his patience entirely using funds she intended to steal through Haley's fraudulent credit cards. Haley, meanwhile, was sitting on the brick retaining wall, completely ignoring the massive criminal conspiracy unfolding around her. She was aggressively texting on her phone, taking a selfie with her iced coffee, and complaining loudly to David about the morning humidity ruining her expensive blowout. She was entirely oblivious to the fact that her financial future had been pawned to pay for the floral arches currently sitting on the sidewalk. I did not need to watch the screens anymore. The trap had not just sprung, it had clamped shut with bone-crushing force. The dominoes were perfectly aligned, and Linda had just pushed the first one over with her own manicured hand. I pulled my headphones down, letting them rest around my neck. I reached across the sleek glass desk and closed my laptop, ending the live video feed. The silence in the hotel room was sudden, absolute, and incredibly peaceful. I stood up, smoothing my soft loungewear, and walked over to the armchair where I had tossed my leather overnight bag. I unzipped the side compartment and pulled out the thick, heavy manila folder. I weighed it in my hands, feeling the physical density of the paper. Inside was the certified deed to the house, proving absolute sole ownership exclusively in my name. Beside it sat the commercial insurance liability policy, bearing my forged signature, printed in high-resolution color. Tucked securely in the back of the folder were the printed financial dossiers, detailing David's extensive corporate embezzlement trail and the devastating credit card fraud Linda had committed against her own teenage daughter. This single manila folder contained the ultimate power to dismantle their entire constructed reality. It was the weapon I had forged in the dark during the long nights of my supposed incompetence and failure. It was the absolute, undeniable truth. I slid the folder securely under my arm, feeling the solid edge of it against my ribs. I grabbed my car keys from the hotel nightstand and slipped my phone into my pocket. "Let's go meet the police," I whispered to the empty room. The drive from the Grand Monarch Hotel to my house took exactly 8 minutes. I drove with the windows rolled up and the radio turned completely off, letting the profound silence of the vehicle match the cold, clinical rhythm of my own heartbeat. I was not anxious. I was not afraid. The chaotic emotional storm that had dictated my entire relationship with my family for 35 years was entirely gone, leaving behind a smooth, hard surface of absolute resolve. I navigated the familiar suburban streets, taking careful note of the thick, humid air clinging to the windshield. By the time I turned onto my quiet, tree-lined avenue, the scene unfolding before my property was nothing short of spectacular. 2 municipal police cruisers had already blocked the center of the road, their light bars spinning wildly and casting aggressive red and blue reflections against the pristine white sides of the commercial catering truck. The neighborhood had officially woken up. Mrs. Gable was now standing at the very edge of her front lawn, joined by 2 other neighbors, openly pointing and whispering as they watched the circus descend upon my property. I pulled my SUV smoothly to the curb, parking directly behind the second police cruiser, I turned off the ignition, grabbed the heavy manila folder off the passenger seat, and stepped out into the thick morning air. The front lawn was a masterpiece of escalating panic. The luxury event planner Sylvia was standing near the massive floral arches, furiously tapping away on her phone while glaring daggers at my parents. The executive chef had his arms crossed over his pristine white coat, flanking the front porch like an angry sentinel. The lighting crew had completely stopped moving, opting to lean against their flatbed truck and watch the drama unfold. And right in the center of the chaos, standing on my slate front walkway, was Linda. 4 uniformed police officers had stepped out of their cruisers and approached the porch. My mother immediately launched into a performance worthy of a seasoned theatrical actress. She rushed toward the lead officer, her hands clasped together against her chest, her face a perfect mask of distressed, affluent victimhood. She adjusted her oversized designer sunglasses and let out a breathless, shaky sigh. "Officers, thank goodness you are here!" she cried out, her voice projecting loudly enough for the neighbors and the vendors to hear every single word. "I am dealing with an absolute nightmare this morning. I own this property, and I am hosting a massive, highly publicized charity event today. As you can see, I have dozens of professionals here ready to set up. But a disgruntled former tenant of mine, someone I recently had to evict, has maliciously come onto my property in the middle of the night and illegally changed all the locks. I cannot get inside my own home, and my vendors have thousands of dollars of perishable goods sitting in these trucks. I need you to break that door down immediately so we can salvage this event." The lead officer, a tall man with a stern face and a heavy utility belt, held up a hand to stop her frantic verbal barrage. "Ma'am, we cannot simply break down a door without verifying property ownership and assessing the situation," he explained, his tone firm but measured. "We need to understand exactly what is going on here before we cause property damage. Do you have your identification on you?" Linda let out a sharp, offended gasp. "I am Linda Wilson," she announced as if her name alone carried municipal authority. "I am a prominent member of this community, and this is an emergency. I have over 150 high-profile guests arriving this evening, and this vindictive squatter is trying to ruin my reputation. You need to do your jobs and get this door open right now." I closed my car door with a solid, heavy thud. The sound cracked like a gunshot over the quiet hum of the idling catering truck. David, who had been cowering near the rear bumper of the rented Escalade, was the first to see me. All the remaining color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a pastel blue cashmere sweater. He physically stumbled backward, his heel catching on the concrete curb as he desperately tried to put distance between himself and my approaching figure. Haley, who had been sitting on the brick retaining wall complaining about her hair, dropped her plastic iced coffee cup directly onto the driveway. It shattered, spilling brown liquid across the pavement as her jaw fell open in sheer disbelief. Linda turned her head, annoyed by the sudden distraction. Her eyes locked onto mine. For one microscopic fraction of a second, the arrogant, entitled facade completely vanished. I saw the pure, unadulterated terror flash across her pupils. She realized in that exact moment that I was not in Chicago. I was not safely out of the picture. I was standing right in front of her holding a thick manila folder, and I looked entirely comfortable. But my mother possessed a toxic brand of narcissism that simply would not allow her to surrender. Confronted with the absolute collapse of her reality, she chose to double down on her delusion. She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my chest and let out a shrill, piercing scream. "There she is!" Linda shrieked, her voice echoing off the surrounding houses. "Officers, arrest her right now! That is the squatter! That is the woman who locked us out of our home! Arrest her for vandalism and trespassing!" The 4 police officers immediately pivoted, turning their attention away from my mother and focusing entirely on me. Their posture shifted instantly from administrative assessment to cautious defensive readiness. 2 of the officers stepped forward, placing themselves squarely between me and the house, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. "Ma'am, stay right where you are," the lead officer commanded, his voice projecting clear municipal authority. "Keep your hands where we can see them." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply stopped walking, planting my feet firmly on my own concrete driveway. I stood perfectly still, making absolutely sure my body language projected calm, cooperative compliance. I wore soft yoga pants and a simple gray sweater, looking exactly like a homeowner who had just woken up to find a circus on her lawn. "I live here, officer," I said, my voice steady, smooth, and entirely devoid of panic. "That woman screaming on the lawn is my mother, Linda Wilson. She does not own this property. She has never owned this property. She does not live here, and she does not have permission to be here. She is attempting to stage an unauthorized commercial event on my land while she believed I was out of town on a business trip." Linda let out a sound that was half gasp and half screech. "She is lying!" Linda yelled frantically, waving her arms at the police. "She is a pathological liar and a thief. Do not listen to a word she says. I own this estate. I paid for it. Get her off my property right now." The lead officer looked between Linda's frantic flailing and my absolute stillness. He took a few steps toward me, closing the distance while his partner kept an eye on my parents. "Ma'am, I am going to need to see some official identification right now," he requested, extending his hand. "Absolutely," I replied, my tone polite and respectful. "My identification is right here in this folder, along with all the relevant property documents. May I open it?" The officer nodded, giving me permission. I slowly unclasped the metal fastener of the thick manila envelope. The heavy silence on the driveway was deafening. The catering crew, the lighting technicians, and the event planner were all standing perfectly still, hanging on every single word of this exchange. The grand illusion of Linda's wealth was hanging by a singular fragile thread. I reached into the folder and retrieved my state-issued driver's license, handing it directly to the lead officer. He took the plastic card, examining the photograph, and then reading the bold black text. He glanced up at the numbers bolted securely next to my garage door. The address on the license matched the house perfectly. "I am the sole legal owner of this residence," I continued smoothly, reaching back into the folder. I pulled out a stack of crisp, heavy paper sealed with the official blue stamp of the county clerk's office. "This is the original certified property deed recorded entirely in my name. I purchased this home independently 5 years ago. There are no other names on the title." I handed the thick packet of legal documents to the officer. He took them, his eyes scanning the dense legal text, the official stamps, and the clear, unambiguous declaration of sole ownership. While he is reading that I have additional verification, I added, pulling out the next set of papers. "Here is my most recent mortgage statement from my bank, clearly showing my name and this property address. And here is the current municipal water bill, the electric bill, and the property tax assessment, all registered strictly to me." The lead officer took the additional documents, holding them together like a deck of irrefutable facts. He spent a long, quiet minute cross-referencing the name on my driver's license with the name printed boldly across the deed, the mortgage, and the utility bills. He looked at the official county seal. He looked at the house numbers. He looked at my calm, compliant posture. The shift in the officer's demeanor was instantaneous and profound. The cautious, defensive posture he had adopted when treating me as a potential suspect completely evaporated. He handed my driver's license back to me along with the stack of bills, keeping only the certified deed in his hand. He turned his body, slightly repositioning himself so that he was no longer blocking my path to the house, but rather standing alongside me, facing the crowd on the lawn. Sylvia, the event planner, let out a sharp, breathless gasp. The executive chef dragged a heavy hand across his face, shaking his head in absolute disgust as the reality of the situation crashed down on the vendors. They were not working for a wealthy estate owner. They were standing on the lawn of a fraud. The lead officer gripped the certified deed tightly in his hand. He squared his shoulders and marched directly back across the grass toward my mother. Linda took a step backward, her designer sunglasses slipping slightly down her nose as the sheer force of municipal reality closed in on her. The officer reviews the paperwork, looks up at the house numbers, and then turns a hardened glare toward Linda. "Ma'am, this house belongs exclusively to Joanna. You are trespassing." The silence that followed my declaration was absolute and suffocating. It was as if the humid morning air had suddenly frozen solid. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers swept across the stunned faces of everyone gathered on my front lawn. David was the first to break the stillness, the color completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickly pale shade of gray. He lunged forward, reaching for the thick manila folder resting on the hood of the rented SUV. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely grasp the heavy paper. He flipped the cover open, his eyes darting frantically across the top document. It was a printed spreadsheet detailing a labyrinth of wire transfers from his commercial real estate firm into 3 dummy shell companies. I had tracked every single stolen dollar directly back to his personal offshore accounts. The exact amount he had embezzled to fund Linda's insatiable appetite for luxury exceeded $500,000. David let out a strangled, gasping sound. He dropped the folder as if it were coated in burning acid. He stumbled backward, pressing his spine against the side of the rented Cadillac, his chest heaving as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. Haley stood entirely frozen on the brick retaining wall. The remnants of her spilled iced coffee dripped slowly down the concrete driveway. She looked from David to me, and then finally turned her wide, horrified eyes toward our mother. "What is she talking about?" "Mom?" Haley demanded, her voice cracking, pitching upward into a terrified squeak. "What credit card debt? You told me those black premium cards were your special VIP accounts. You said Dad got a massive bonus at work." Linda whipped her head around, her perfectly styled hair flying across her face. She stepped toward Haley, holding her hands up in a placating gesture. "Do not listen to her, sweetie," Linda pleaded, her voice taking on a sickly sweet, desperate tone. "Your sister is just jealous. She has always been bitterly jealous of you because you are beautiful and popular, and she is just a miserable, lonely woman. She is making all of this up to ruin your special day." I did not raise my voice. I simply tapped the open folder on the hood of the car, pointing directly at the second stack of papers. "The bank statements are right there, Haley," I stated calmly. 3 separate high-limit credit cards. They were opened 6 months ago using your name, your birth date, and your social security number. They are completely maxed out. Your mother used your identity to fund her country club lunches, her spa weekends, and the massive non-refundable deposits for this exact party. When those credit card companies initiate collections, and they will very soon, your credit score will be utterly destroyed. You will not be able to secure a student loan for college. You will not be able to finance a car or rent your first apartment. Your mother sold your entire financial future to buy herself a few months of pretending she is a wealthy socialite. Haley let out a piercing, gut-wrenching scream. It was not the spoiled whine of a teenager denied a luxury item. It was the visceral, agonizing sound of absolute betrayal. She realized in that exact moment that she was not the cherished golden child. She was merely a financial resource, a prop in Linda's grand theatrical production. Haley hurled her expensive designer handbag directly at Linda, striking her mother squarely in the chest. Sylvia, the event planner, had heard absolutely enough. The mention of maxed-out fraudulent credit cards and massive embezzlement was the ultimate red flag in her industry. She marched forward, her silver clipboard tucked tightly under her arm, her face set in a mask of furious professional indignation. "This event is officially terminated," Sylvia announced, her voice cutting through the humid air with absolute authority. She turned to the heavy-set lighting foreman and the executive chef. "Pack it all up, gentlemen. Do not leave a single napkin or light bulb on this property. We are executing a full hard stop withdrawal." Linda spun around frantically, grabbing the sleeve of Sylvia's sharp black pantsuit. "You cannot do this!" Linda shrieked, her carefully maintained country club accent completely dissolving into a harsh, desperate screech. "I signed a contract. I have 150 important guests arriving in a few hours. I will write you a check right now. I will pay you double." Sylvia forcefully yanked her arm out of my mother's grasp, looking at her with an expression of pure, unfiltered disgust. "You do not have a single legitimate cent to your name, Mrs. Wilson. Your initial deposit checks bounced twice before you finally provided a credit card. Now I understand why. You are a fraud. If you ever contact my agency again, I will personally have you arrested for theft of services." The front lawn instantly transformed into a chaotic staging ground for a rapid retreat. The caterers practically ran back to their pristine white truck, throwing boxes of expensive flatware and delicate crystal glasses haphazardly into the rear cargo bay. The massive commercial cooling units roared to life as the chef slammed the heavy rear doors shut, securing his $10,000 inventory. Across the street, the floral design crew began aggressively yanking the imported orchids out of the decorative archway, tossing the delicate blooms into plastic transport bins. The lighting crew dragged their heavy black cables across the wet grass, moving with the speed of an emergency evacuation. While the vendors dismantled the grand illusion, a sleek black stretch limousine turned onto my street. It pulled smoothly to the curb, parking directly behind the police cruisers. The rear doors opened, and a dozen heavily styled teenagers stepped out onto the sidewalk. They were dressed in expensive cocktail attire, holding brightly wrapped gifts and chatting excitedly. They stopped dead in their tracks, staring at the scene unfolding on my driveway. They saw the police cars with their flashing lights. They saw the catering trucks speeding away. They saw Haley sitting on the retaining wall, sobbing uncontrollably, with her mascara running down her cheeks in thick, dark streams. Instantly, a dozen smartphones were raised in the air. The glowing screens illuminated the faces of Haley's wealthy, popular friends as they began recording the entire spectacular collapse, broadcasting my mother's absolute ruin to their entire high school network. Linda saw the glowing camera lenses and let out a sound like a wounded animal. Her social standing, the only currency she truly valued, was evaporating on a live feed. She spun around and charged directly at me, her hands curled into rigid claws, her eyes wild and unfocused. "You ruined everything," Linda screamed, lunging across the hood of the rented SUV. "You ungrateful, miserable little witch. We raised you. We fed you. You owe us this." Before she could close the distance, the lead police officer stepped smoothly into her path. He planted a heavy hand squarely in the center of her chest, physically stopping her momentum and forcing her backward. "Step back right now, ma'am," the officer barked, his voice commanding absolute obedience. "Keep your hands down and back away from the homeowner." Linda stumbled backward, her chest heaving, her designer sunglasses hanging askew from one ear. She pointed wildly at me, demanding the police arrest me, insisting that I was the one committing a crime by withholding my wealth from my family. I picked up the manila folder and turned directly to the lead officer. I handed him a single sheet of paper from the very back of the stack. "Officer, there is one more item requiring your immediate attention," I said, my voice dropping to a calm clinical register. "That is a commercial liability insurance policy for this specific address. It was filed with the city permit office to secure clearance for today's massive event. As you can clearly see, it bears my signature as the sole property owner, acknowledging absolute legal liability for any damages, injuries, or incidents that occur on the premises." The officer took the paper, scanning the complex legal jargon and the bold signature line at the bottom. I was in Chicago on business when that document was signed and notarized. I continued, ensuring the surrounding crowd heard every single word. "I never authorized this event. I never saw that policy until I pulled the municipal permit records this morning. My mother, Linda Wilson, forged my signature on a binding legal document to secure a municipal event permit on property she does not own. She committed felony fraud and identity theft to bypass the city's commercial zoning regulations." The lead officer looked from the forged signature to my mother. The lingering administrative patience in his eyes completely vanished, replaced by the hardened, sharp focus of a law enforcement professional identifying a clear and present felony. He handed the paper back to me and unclipped the radio from his shoulder strap. He requested a secondary unit and a fraud investigator to be dispatched to our location immediately. David, realizing the inescapable gravity of the situation, attempted to slowly, quietly back away toward the street. He turned his body, keeping his head down, hoping to slip away in the chaos of the departing vendors and the crowd of recording teenagers. The second police officer intercepted him before he could reach the sidewalk. The officer placed a firm, unyielding grip on David's shoulder, spinning the older man around to face the driveway. "Nobody is leaving this location until we sort this out." The second officer stated, his hand hovering instinctively near his utility belt. David immediately threw his hands up in a desperate gesture of surrender. His loyalty to my mother evaporated the instant his own freedom was threatened. "It was her idea," David stammered, his voice pitching into a pathetic, terrified whine. "I told her we should not do it. I told her Joanna would find out. The forged signature, the credit cards, it was all Linda. I had nothing to do with this. I swear I was just trying to keep the peace." Linda gasped, pressing a hand over her heart, as her designated enforcer publicly abandoned her. "You spineless coward," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You signed the incorporation papers for those fake shell companies. You moved the money from your partners. Do not you dare try to pin this entirely on me." The lead officer stepped directly between them, raising both hands to silence the escalating mutual destruction. He pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from the pouch on the back of his belt. The sharp, metallic clicking sound echoed loudly in the humid morning air, freezing my parents in their tracks. He turned his hardened gaze toward Linda and David, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting sharply in his eyes. He instructed them to place their hands behind their backs, informing them they were officially being detained, pending a full criminal investigation into identity theft, forgery, and financial fraud. A sleek, unmarked black sedan suddenly turned the corner, gliding smoothly past the line of limousines and coming to a stop directly behind the police cruisers. Two men wearing sharp, tailored suits stepped out of the vehicle, their expressions grim and strictly professional. They walked straight up my driveway, bypassing the crowd of teenagers and flashing gold badges to the officers. The two men wearing sharp, tailored suits stepped out of the vehicle, their expressions grim and strictly professional. They walked straight up my driveway, bypassing the crowd of teenagers and flashing gold badges to the officers. State Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Division. The taller investigator announced, his voice carrying a crisp, authoritative edge that immediately commanded the space. He looked briefly at the uniformed police officers before turning his sharp gaze directly toward the thick manila folder resting on the hood of Linda's rented SUV. The lead police officer quickly briefed them, pointing out the forged commercial liability insurance document, and then gesturing toward David and Linda, who were both frozen in varying states of absolute panic. I watched with immense satisfaction as the state investigator picked up the heavy folder. His eyes scanned the detailed transaction logs, the offshore routing numbers, and the undeniable proof of David's extensive corporate embezzlement. He then flipped to the back section, analyzing the credit card statements I had meticulously compiled outlining Linda's identity theft. The air on the driveway was thick with humidity and the crushing weight of impending justice. Haley was still sitting on the edge of the brick retaining wall, but she was no longer looking at her phone. The words I had spoken about the $60,000 of debt under her Social Security number had finally penetrated her self-absorbed bubble. The realization seemed to physically strike her. She slid off the wall, her designer heels hitting the concrete driveway with a sharp clack. She walked toward Linda, her face twisted in a mixture of profound confusion and absolute horror. Her hands trembled as she clutched her expensive phone against her chest. "Mom, tell me she is lying," Haley demanded, her voice shaking uncontrollably and pitching upward into a terrified squeak. "Tell me you did not take out credit cards in my name. Tell me my credit is not ruined. You said those black cards were VIP accounts. You said Dad got a massive bonus." Linda tried to put on her soothing maternal mask, reaching out to stroke Haley's arm, but her hands were shaking too violently to maintain the illusion. "Sweetheart, it is just a temporary cash flow issue," Linda stammered, her voice high, tight, and laced with desperate panic. "I was going to pay it all back as soon as your father's bonus cleared. I just needed to bridge the gap for this party. It is not a big deal." Haley slapped her mother's hands away with a sharp, violent motion. The physical rejection shocked Linda far more than the looming police presence. "Not a big deal," Haley shrieked, her voice echoing loudly down the quiet suburban street. "You stole my identity. I cannot even apply for a student loan. I cannot get an apartment. You ruined my entire life just to throw a stupid party so your friends would think you are rich." Haley collapsed onto the manicured grass of the front lawn, burying her face in her hands and breaking into loud, hysterical, ugly sobs. Her entire privileged future had just evaporated, stolen by the very woman who was supposed to protect her. The realization that she had been used as a disposable financial resource broke her completely. The lead police officer nodded to the state investigators. The public admission of guilt regarding the credit cards, combined with the irrefutable documentary evidence of forgery and embezzlement, provided all the probable cause they needed to act. The officer turned his full attention back to my parents, his jaw set in a hard, uncompromising line. Linda Wilson. David Wilson, you are both being detained on suspicion of identity theft, commercial fraud, and filing a false police report, the officer announced, his voice projecting the heavy, undeniable weight of the law. He stepped forward and grabbed Linda's wrist smoothly, twisting her arm behind her back. The sharp, metallic ratcheting sound of the handcuffs snapping closed over her wrist sounded like a heavy steel vault door slamming shut forever. Linda reacted like a feral, cornered animal. She thrashed against the officer's grip, her crisp white linen jumpsuit twisting awkwardly around her waist. "Get your hands off me!" she screamed, her face turning a blotchy mottled red with pure indignation. "You cannot do this to me. I am a respected member of the community. I know the mayor. I know the chief of police. I will have your badge for this." The officer ignored her entirely, securing the cuffs and beginning to read her Miranda rights in a bored, monotonous voice that infuriated her even more. She continued to kick and scream, fighting against the inevitable reality that her social standing could not save her from a felony arrest. David, on the other hand, offered absolutely no physical or verbal resistance. When the second uniformed officer approached him with handcuffs drawn, David simply held out his wrists, tears streaming silently down his face. His pastel blue cashmere sweater was stained with dark patches of nervous sweat. He looked like a deflated balloon, a man who had spent his entire adult life following his wife's toxic orders, only to find himself facing a lengthy prison sentence because of his blind obedience. The click of his handcuffs was barely audible over Linda's continuous screaming, but the finality of the sound was absolute. He hung his head completely broken. Sylvia, the luxury event planner, watched the arrests with cold clinical satisfaction. She turned sharply on her heel and signaled aggressively to her remaining crew. The catering trucks were already pulling away from the curb, their heavy diesel engines roaring as they sped down the street, taking the imported Wagyu beef and artisanal cheeses with them. The chef did not even look back. The lighting foreman threw the last heavy steel truss onto his flatbed, slammed the tailgate shut, and jumped into the driver's seat, tires squealing as he departed. Within minutes, the massive, expensive illusion my mother had tried to build was completely and efficiently dismantled. The only things left on the lawn were deep tire tracks in the grass and a few crushed orchid petals scattered across the wet driveway. Out on the sidewalk, the scene was equally devastating for Haley. The stretch limousines that had dropped off her wealthy, popular friends were already circling back around the block, instructed by their dispatchers to clear the area and avoid the police presence. The dozen teenagers in expensive cocktail dresses and tailored suits stood clustered together on the curb. They were no longer looking at my house with awe or anticipation. They were looking at Haley, who was sobbing uncontrollably on the lawn, and at Linda, who was being shoved forcefully into the back of a police cruiser with expressions of pure, unadulterated judgment. There was no grand charity event. There was no gourmet food. There was no professional DJ or custom lighting. There was only a spectacular, highly public humiliation. The cruel reality of teenage social dynamics took over instantly. Several of the wealthy teens pulled out their phones recording the arrests and laughing amongst themselves, pointing at Haley crying on the grass. The social death Linda feared more than anything else was happening live, broadcasted to hundreds of high school students across the county in high-definition video. Their ruined reputation was now permanent digital record. The second officer placed a heavy hand on the top of David's head, guiding the weeping man into the back seat of the second police cruiser. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing him inside the caged back seat. I stood on the edge of the driveway, my arms crossed comfortably over my chest, watching the absolute destruction of their toxic empire. The air felt lighter. The oppressive, suffocating humidity seemed to have finally broken, leaving behind a crisp, clear morning. David pressed his face against the reinforced glass of the cruiser window. His eyes were red and swollen, pleading with a pathetic, desperate intensity that I had never seen from him before. He managed to roll the window down just a fraction of an inch before the officer locked the controls from the front dashboard. "Joanna, please!" David begged, his voice cracking and filtering through the narrow gap in the window. "We are your family. We are your blood. You cannot do this to us. Please tell them it is a misunderstanding. We can fix this. I will pay the money back. Just tell them to let us go." I walked slowly toward the police cruiser, my footsteps steady and deliberate on the concrete. I stopped just a few feet away from the rear door. I looked at the man who had stood by silently while my mother tore me down for decades. I looked at the man who had smashed my bedroom door frame when I was a teenager, simply because Linda told him to. I looked at the man who had just tried to throw a heavy river rock through my dining room window to facilitate a burglary. There was absolutely no pity left in me. There was no anger. There was no sadness. There was only the cold, hard, brilliant truth of justice. I looked him dead in the eye and delivered the final blow. You stopped being my family the day you let my daughter sit alone in an empty room. Consider this, my RSVP. I turned my back on the police cruiser, leaving David sobbing hysterically against the glass. I did not look back as the engines roared to life and the sirens gave a brief, sharp chirp. I walked slowly up my driveway, my spine perfectly straight toward my quiet, safe, and beautifully empty house. I reached the solid oak door and slid my newly minted brass key into the cylinder. It turned with a satisfying heavy click echoing loudly in the quiet space. I pushed the door open and stepped across the threshold. The contrast between the humid, chaotic circus of the driveway and the cool, pristine sanctuary of my foyer was absolute. I closed the door behind me, turning the deadbolt and throwing the secondary heavy brass latch. Through the thick, insulated glass of the front windows, I heard the heavy rumble of the police cruisers accelerating down the street, taking the architects of my misery away in the back of caged vehicles. The flashing red and blue lights faded into the morning glare, leaving only the bright suburban sunlight filtering through the trees. My house was perfectly silent. It was a deep, breathing kind of silence that settled directly into my bones. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a tall glass of iced water, and leaned against the granite counter, watching the very last catering truck disappear around the corner. The invasion was over. I had defended my fortress, and I had won. I took a long, slow drink of the cold water, feeling the cool liquid slide down my throat. The toxic, crushing weight of my family's expectations, their demands, and their relentless emotional extortion was completely gone. I owned my home. I owned my life. I owned my future. Exactly 14 days passed since that spectacular morning. The legal and financial fallout was not just swift, it was entirely biblical. The state investigators had not wasted a single second dissecting the massive mountain of evidence I had handed them on the driveway. David was completely denied bail during his initial arraignment due to the offshore accounts, posing a significant and immediate flight risk. The full scope of his corporate embezzlement was exposed in a brutal, highly public federal indictment. He was facing multiple severe federal charges spanning wire fraud, money laundering, and grand larceny. His former business partners, the men he had stolen from for years, had immediately initiated a massive civil lawsuit to claw back every single stolen dollar, effectively freezing all of David and Linda's remaining assets. Linda's descent into ruin was even more precipitous and humiliating. The woman who had spent decades meticulously curating an image of flawless aristocratic wealth was now sitting in a drab concrete county holding cell, facing profound felony charges for identity theft, municipal fraud, and filing a false police report. Her prestigious country club membership was revoked by an emergency executive board vote the very next morning. The local society pages, which she had so desperately sought to dominate, published a scathing front page, exposed detailing how the glamorous charity gala was nothing more than a desperate fraudulent scheme built entirely on stolen credit cards and trespassing. The absolute worst blow to Linda, however, was the total loss of her grand estate. With David's illicit income completely frozen and their legal fees skyrocketing, the bank initiated immediate aggressive foreclosure proceedings on their sprawling suburban home. The bank slapped a bright neon foreclosure notice directly on her custom mahogany front door for the entire neighborhood to witness. The luxury cars were repossessed by tow trucks in the middle of the night. Her meticulously constructed empire of lies had collapsed into fine dust blowing away in the wind. She was left with absolutely nothing but the stark reality of a prison sentence and a public reputation as a pathetic, desperate fraud. Haley suffered the most abrupt and violent collision with reality. Stripped of her golden child status, her designer handbags, and the illusion of endless wealth, she was forced to confront the wreckage her mother left behind. The $60,000 in fraudulent credit card debt, chained securely to her Social Security number, meant she could not secure a student loan, a car lease, or even a basic studio apartment. With her parents incarcerated and their assets seized, Haley was entirely homeless and destitute. She had nowhere to turn except to Aunt Barbara. Barbara was my father's sister, a stern, practical woman who despised Linda's pretentious lifestyle and absolutely did not tolerate a single ounce of nonsense. Barbara agreed to take Haley in, but under incredibly strict, unforgiving conditions. There were no more leisurely spa days. There were no more luxury blowouts, catered lunches, or shopping sprees at the high-end boutiques. To pay off the massive mountain of debt and contribute to the basic household expenses, Barbara forced Haley to get a job immediately. The girl who had literally scoffed at my marketing career and complained endlessly about the morning humidity ruining her hair was now working 35 hours a week at a local fast food restaurant. She was forced to wear a stiff, scratchy polyester uniform, a mandatory hairnet, and heavy, non-slip orthopedic shoes. Instead of riding in stretch limousines with wealthy friends, she spent her afternoons standing in front of a boiling deep fryer, smelling permanently of old grease, and handing out greasy paper bags through a drive-through window. She was required to scrub the dining room floors and empty the heavy trash receptacles at the end of every grueling shift. Her wealthy, popular friends had completely abandoned her the exact moment the scandal broke, treating her like a highly contagious disease. When some of those former friends drove their expensive cars through her drive-through lane, laughing and pointing their phones at her while she handed them their cheap burgers, the humiliation was absolute. It was the ultimate brutal reality check she desperately needed. She was finally learning the true value of a dollar the hard, backbreaking way. While Haley was learning the harsh, grueling reality of minimum wage, I was standing in the pristine departure lounge of the international airport. I held a steaming cup of artisan coffee in one hand and my daughter's small hand in the other. Lily was absolutely vibrating with pure excitement. She was wearing a bright floral sundress and a tiny straw hat, clutching the handle of her brand-new rolling carry-on bag, decorated with brightly colored tropical birds. We were embarking on a spectacular, long-overdue Mommy and Me birthday celebration. I had promised Lily a magical trip, and I possessed the absolute financial freedom to deliver it without checking my bank balance a single time. We were not flying standby or searching for budget accommodations in the back of an economy cabin. We were doing this flawlessly and in absolute comfort. The gate agent smiled warmly as she announced the boarding call for our direct flight to Maui. She called for first-class passengers to approach the desk. I handed the agent our pristine printed tickets and guided Lily down the carpeted jet bridge. Stepping onto the aircraft was stepping into a completely different world. The first-class cabin was an oasis of expansive, quiet luxury. Wide leather seats reclined fully into flat beds, offering massive amounts of personal space. Soft ambient lighting illuminated the spacious cabin, and flight attendants moved gracefully through the wide aisles, offering warm, scented towels and fresh fruit juices before takeoff. Lily scrambled excitedly into her massive window seat, her eyes wide with absolute wonder. She pressed her face against the thick plexiglass, watching the ground crew load the aircraft. I settled into the plush leather seat beside her, stowing my designer tote bag securely under the center console. A flight attendant approached, offering me a crystal flute of sparkling water with a fresh slice of lime. I accepted it with a polite nod, feeling the cool, smooth glass against my palm. I leaned back against the headrest, taking a slow, deep breath of the filtered cabin air. The financial independence I had meticulously built, the wealth I had fiercely protected from my mother's parasitic grasp, was now shielding my daughter and giving us the entire world. I had officially broken the generational curse that had plagued my family. Lily would never know the toxic manipulation, the conditional affection, or the frantic financial desperation that had defined my own childhood. She would never have to buy her mother's love or sacrifice her own security to maintain a false image. She would only know stability, genuine love, and the absolute freedom to pursue her own happiness. My smartphone vibrated softly in the pocket of my linen travel trousers. I pulled it out, glancing down at the glowing digital screen. It was a brief email notification from my attorney providing the final confirmation that the protective restraining orders against David and Linda had been permanently approved by a superior court judge. They were legally barred from contacting me or Lily for the rest of their natural lives. The final toxic tie was entirely severed. The absolute silence of their permanent absence was the most beautiful, comforting sound I had ever heard. I looked at the notification and smiled a genuine, radiant smile. I did not type a reply. I did not save the message. I simply swiped down, opening the control center on my touchscreen, and pressed the airplane mode icon. The cellular signal vanished instantly, severing my connection to the mainland and the chaotic wreckage of the past. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, completely unbothered, entirely financially independent, and finally totally free. I turned my attention to my beautiful daughter, who was enthusiastically pointing out a massive passing luggage cart on the bright, sunlit tarmac. I reached out and gently smoothed a soft, stray lock of hair behind her small ear. "Are you ready for Hawaii, my sweet girl?" I asked, my voice rich with absolute, uncontainable joy. Lily turned to me, her face illuminated by a massive, brilliant smile that reached all the way to her bright eyes. "I am so ready, Mommy," she declared, squeezing my hand tightly with both of hers. The heavy aircraft engines roared to life beneath us, vibrating through the floorboards as the plane pushed back from the gate and turned toward the open runway. I held my daughter's hand, watching the gray city shrink away beneath the breaking clouds, leaving the toxic shadows of my past far behind as we soared into the bright, limitless sky.